Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History for Deep Rest. Tonight we step out onto a wide silent plain where the air is so cold it almost feels solid. You stand beneath a sky that stretches endlessly, brushed with faint winter stars, and your breath drifts upward in pale clouds. Snow creaks under your feet with that unmistakable sound, dry and sharp like crushed sugar. There are no streetlights, no hum of distant traffic, only the wind gliding low across the grassland, searching for anything not firmly tied down. You pull your cloak tighter, already aware that if you misjudge this season, you probably will not survive this. Winter here is not a decorative dusting. It is not a charming holiday postcard. It is a force that presses against skin, bone, and thought itself. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, I would love to know where you are listening from and what your local time is. Is it late evening for you, or are you drifting off in the early hours? Now dim the lights, and let the cold settle around you, not as a threat, but as a teacher. You stand among a Native American family preparing for the deep freeze of winter. The land is familiar to them. Every dip in the terrain, every line of trees, every sheltered hollow is known by memory. A well-established historical understanding shows that many indigenous communities across North America developed seasonal rhythms, shifting camps or reinforcing dwellings as temperatures fell. Winter was not a surprise attack, it was an expected visitor. Still, expectation does not make it gentle. You notice how preparations begin long before the first blizzard. In late autumn there is movement. Supplies are counted and recounted. Hides are inspected for tears. Poles are checked for strength. You run your hand over a thick buffalo robe and feel the dense underfur that once kept the animal alive through icy nights. Now it will do the same for a human body. The wind picks up and you instinctively turn your back to it. The family does the same almost without thinking. You begin to sense that survival here is not about heroic last-minute action. It is about habit, repetition, small consistent decisions made months before the snow falls. You watch as a grandmother traces the horizon with narrowed eyes. She is not guessing, she is remembering. Many plains communities relied on accumulated knowledge passed through generations. Patterns of wind, the way clouds build before a storm, the subtle shift in animal behavior. It is widely accepted among historians that such environmental literacy was central to survival. You do not need a satellite forecast when your entire culture has been observing the sky for centuries. And yet historians still argue whether certain groups intentionally chose winter camps primarily for protection from enemies or for optimal access to game and firewood. The debate drifts on quiet and academic while you focus on the immediate sensation of cold biting your fingertips. A child runs past you, laughing, boots crunching through shallow snow. It surprises you. You might imagine winter as pure hardship or grim faces and chattering teeth. But there is normal life here too. Laughter, teasing, the everyday rhythm of people who refuse to let the season steal their humanity. You glance toward the structure rising nearby. It might be a tipi, its conical shape angled carefully against prevailing winds, or perhaps in another region a wigwam framed with saplings and wrapped in bark and hides. The shape matters, the orientation matters, everything is deliberate. Even the doorway is positioned away from the harshest gusts. You step closer and feel the difference immediately. Outside, the air knifes across your cheeks. Inside it is calmer, almost intimate. Not warm yet, but contained. You begin to understand that freezing nights are not faced by standing bravely in the open. They are negotiated by reshaping space itself. A curious tidbit recorded in some early accounts describes how certain communities would pack additional earth or snow around the base of their dwellings to block drafts. Snow, which you might curse as an enemy, becomes an insulator. It traps air within its structure, slowing the escape of heat. You kneel and press your glove into a drift, surprised at how quiet it feels. How almost soft. The family's movements grow slower as dusk approaches. There is no frantic scramble. They have done this before. Food stores are secured, tools are brought inside, the sky darkens from steel grey to deep indigo and the first stars appear. You think about how easy it would be to panic if you were alone out here. Your modern instincts might scream for central heating and insulated windows. Instead, you watch a teenage boy adjust a line of poles with practiced hands. You see a mother shake out a heavy robe before laying it carefully inside. You hear the low murmur of conversation, steady and calm. A commonly acknowledged fact among scholars is that communal living played a crucial role during winter months. Families often stayed close, sometimes joining extended relatives in larger structures. The more bodies within a space, the more shared warmth. It is practical, it is efficient, It is quietly brilliant. The wind surges again, mantling the outer covering of the dwelling. You tense, but no one else does. The structure flexes slightly, then settles. It is designed to move with the gusts, not resist them rigidly. You realize something subtle and important. Survival here is not about dominating nature. It is about understanding its patterns and bending just enough to avoid breaking. Night finally takes hold. The cold intensifies, pressing against the walls. You imagine the temperature dropping far below freezing, the kind of cold that makes eyelashes stiff. And yet inside there is preparation order and a kind of quiet confidence. You lower yourself onto a folded hide near the center of the shelter. The ground beneath feels firm, but not as unforgiving as you expected. There is layering here, thoughtfulness, intention. You listen to the wind one more time, skimming over the plains, and you realize that winter is not merely endured. It is anticipated, studied, respected. The freezing night becomes less of a monster and more of a demanding companion. And as the darkness deepens around you, you begin to sense that this is only the beginning of understanding how families survived without modern walls or thermostats. The story of insulation fire, shared warmth and ingenuity is just unfolding like a slow breath in the cold air. You pull the robe closer around your shoulders and let the quiet settle in. The wind does not disappear when you close your eyes. It brushes along the outer walls, searching for weakness-testing seams. You lie there listening, aware that the shape of the home around you is not accidental. It is a response refined over generations to nights exactly like this. You shift your gaze upward. The structure curves above you, its frame formed from long poles that meet at the top in a careful convergence. In many plains communities, the tipi stands as one of the most recognizable winter dwellings. A broadly accepted historical fact confirms that its conical design was not simply aesthetic. The shape allowed fierce winds to flow around it rather than crash directly into a flat wall. You can almost feel the air sliding past, diverted instead of defiant. You reach out and brush your fingers against the inner lining. There is more here than a single layer. Buffalo hides overlap with deliberate precision. In colder months, additional liners are hung inside, creating a pocket of trapped air. Air invisible and ordinary becomes your most precious ally. When it is still and contained, it slows the escape of warmth from the fire that will soon glow at the center. You imagine trying to construct such a shelter without blueprints, without hardware stores, without synthetic insulation. And yet these communities did exactly that, guided by memory and practice. Children learned to raise a tipi almost as soon as they could walk steadily. There is something humbling about that. You fumble with a modern tent on a camping trip and congratulate yourself for surviving a mild breeze. Further east you step in your mind into a woodland clearing, where wigwams rise in rounded forms. Saplings bend into arcs tied securely, then covered with sheets of bark or layered hides. The curved profile again serves a purpose. It offers less resistance to winter storms and reduces sharp corners where heat might gather unevenly. You crouch at the entrance and notice how low it is. You must bow slightly to enter, which means cold air has to work harder to rush in. It is a small architectural decision, but it makes a difference. In the northeast, longhouses stretch like extended shadows beneath the trees. These wooden structures, used by Haudenosaunee communities among others, could house multiple families. A mainstream academic consensus notes that their elongated shape allowed several hearths to be spaced along the central corridor, distributing warmth through the length of the building. You picture embers glowing in intervals, each one feeding gentle heat into the shared space. You settle again into your imaginary place within one of these homes. The air smells faintly of smoke and wood resin. There is a subtle sweetness from stored corn and dried squash nearby. Your shoulders relax just slightly because the wind's roar is muted, now reduced to a low murmur beyond bark and hide. A lesser-known anecdote from early observers describes how some winter dwellings included interior liners painted with symbolic designs. These were not only decorative, the extra layers helped manage drafts. It is a quiet reminder that practicality and beauty often lived side by side. You do not have to choose between them even in freezing conditions. Historians continue to debate whether certain structural variations developed primarily from environmental necessity or from cultural preference that later proved environmentally effective. The line between adaptation and tradition can blur over centuries. You might wonder if it even matters. When the temperature plummets, the result is what counts. The structure holds. You stretch your legs and consider the floor beneath you. In some regions, mats woven from reeds or grasses line the ground. In others, thick hides form a barrier between sleeping bodies and frozen earth. Contact with the ground is one of the fastest ways to lose heat. You feel the truth of that even now as you press your palm downward. The cold seeps upward with patient determination, so families lift themselves just enough. They add layers, they create separation. Sometimes they dig slightly into the earth to stabilize walls, but they avoid direct exposure where it matters most. It is a balance. The home must be anchored, yet the sleeping space must be insulated. You imagine stepping outside again for a brief moment. The stars burn brighter now, sharper against the black sky. The temperature has dropped further. Your eyelashes tingle, and yet when you duck back inside, the difference is immediate. Not tropical warmth, not the cozy hum of central heating, but a noticeable shift. The air inside holds onto itself. You find yourself reflecting on how modern homes rely heavily on mechanical systems. Furnaces, radiators, electric heaters. Here the structure itself does much of the work before any flame is lit. Shape, material, placement, knowledge. A widely recognized historical pattern shows that winter camps were often selected with natural windbreaks in mind. Hills, clusters of trees, riverbanks that shielded against prevailing gusts. You picture families surveying a landscape in the late autumn, not for scenic views, but for subtle protection. Even a shallow depression in the land can reduce wind speed significantly. You would likely walk right past it without noticing. Inside the dwelling, movement slows as the night deepens. Someone adjusts a flap near the top, ensuring it can later vent smoke while minimizing heat loss. Another person checks the tension of the outer covering. Every action is deliberate but unhurried. There is no sense of panic, only routine. You sit quietly absorbing the atmosphere. The walls around you are not rigid drywall. They breathe slightly with the wind. They creak softly as temperatures shift. It might seem fragile at first glance, yet it has endured countless winters. You begin to understand that surviving freezing nights without modern homes is not about brute endurance. It is about thoughtful design grounded in generations of observation. The curve of a pole, the overlap of a hide, the angle of an entrance. These are not random choices. They are quiet answers to the question winter keeps asking. You draw your robe tighter and feel the subtle warmth already gathering within the enclosed space. The wind still moves outside, but it no longer feels like an immediate threat. It is part of the larger rhythm, acknowledged but managed, and as you listen to the low rustle of hides shifting gently against their frames, you sense that the story of insulation is only deepening. Soon the fire will be lit and you will see how flame and airflow must cooperate carefully within these curved walls. For now, you rest inside a shape crafted to hold life steady against the cold. The first glow of firelight begins as a quiet ember almost shy at the centre of the dwelling. You watch as careful hands coax it into a steady flame. The smoke rises in a thin ribbon toward the opening, above, and you feel the temperature shift almost immediately, not dramatically but perceptibly. The cold that pressed against your shoulders eases back a little as if reconsidering its approach. You glance again at the walls, noticing details you missed before. The hides are not draped carelessly. They overlap like scales, each one placed to cover the seam of another. In colder regions, additional liners hang inside, creating a double wall effect. A widely acknowledged historical fact explains that these interior linings were often suspended a short distance from the outer cover, trapping a cushion of air between them. That still pocket becomes a quiet barrier, slowing the escape of heat. You reach out and press your hand gently against the inner layer. It feels supple but firm, thick with winter fur. Buffalo hides were especially valued on the plains because of their dense undercoat. The animal's own adaptation to the cold becomes your protection. You imagine the effort required to hunt, prepare and tan such a hide. This is not disposable insulation. It carries labour memory and gratitude. In woodland regions, bark panels serve a similar purpose. Sheets of elm or birch are layered carefully, sometimes reinforced with woven mats. The texture differs rougher beneath your fingertips, but the principle remains the same. Layer upon layer. Surface against surface. Every seam is an opportunity for cold air to slip in, so every seam must be respected. A curious detail preserved in oral histories suggests that some families deliberately left small gaps near the base of a structure during certain conditions, allowing minimal airflow that prevented excessive condensation inside. It sounds counterintuitive. You would assume sealing everything tight is the goal. Yet too much trapped moisture can chill a space once the fire dies down. Balance is everything. The line between warmth and damp discomfort is thin. Scholars continue to discuss how much of this knowledge developed through trial and error over centuries and how much was refined through shared intertribal exchange. Historians still argue whether particular insulation techniques spread rapidly across regions through trade networks or emerged independently in similar climates. You picture conversations around distant fires, ideas drifting as easily as sparks in the dark. The fire strengthens and you feel warmth on your shins. The smell of smoke mixes with the earthy scent of hides and the faint sweetness of stored food nearby. It is not an unpleasant smell. It is drowning. It reminds you that this warmth is alive, not piped in invisibly from some basement furnace. You look down at the floor. Beneath you are multiple layers. First the earth cold and steady, then a spread of grasses or reeds. Above that, thick robes. Each layer interrupts the upward creep of frost. Direct contact with frozen ground drains heat quickly from the body. This is a simple physical truth recognized across cultures, so families build upward in small increments. In some semi-subterranean winter lodges, particularly among certain plains and plateau communities, the structure is partially dug into the earth. A well-documented historical observation confirms that these earth-sheltered homes relied on the stable temperature below ground level. Soil retains warmth more consistently than exposed air. You imagine stepping down into one of these lodges, feeling the sudden hush as wind noise diminishes and the temperature steadies. You run your fingers along the edge of a robe and notice how thick it is compared to modern blankets. There is weight to it. When you drape it over your shoulders, you feel cocooned. Heavy, yes, but reassuring. The weight itself helps trap warmth close to your body. A lesser-known tidbit describes how some families would periodically shift the position of sleeping areas within a dwelling over the course of winter. This was done to account for subtle changes in airflow or wear in certain spots along the wall. It is almost like rotating crops in a field, but here the harvest is warmth. You admire the attentiveness required to notice such nuances. The fire crackles softly. Someone adds a small log, not too large, not too fast. Excess flame would waste fuel and risk smoke buildup. Insulation works best when paired with controlled heat. Too little fire and even the thickest walls cannot compensate. Too much and comfort turns to suffocation. You reflect on how modern insulation materials are rated and standardized given numbers and certifications. Here the rating system is experience. Did the children sleep through the night without shivering? Did elders wake without frost forming on the inner walls? Those are the metrics that matter. A generally accepted academic view holds that winter survival depended not only on material resources, but also on communal discipline. You cannot leave a flap untied or a seam unsecured out of laziness. One careless oversight invites the cold in for everyone. Responsibility is shared. You close your eyes briefly and listen. Outside the wind hums, inside the fire whispers. The layers around you do their quiet work. You begin to understand insulation not as a product, but as a relationship between materials, air, and human attention. The hides expand and contract slightly as temperatures shift. The bark panels creak faintly. Nothing here is perfectly sealed in the modern sense. Instead, it is adaptive, responsive, alive in its own way. You feel your breathing slow. The warmth at your front contrasts with the cooler air behind you, yet the difference is manageable. You pull the robe higher, tucking it beneath your chin. The heavy fur brushes your cheek, surprisingly soft. And as the night settles deeper, you realize that these layered walls and floors are not merely barriers against winter. They are evidence of accumulated wisdom. Each overlap, each carefully placed liner represents a conversation between people and climate stretching back generations. The cold remains outside, pressing patiently against hide and bark. But here within these thoughtful layers, you rest in a pocket of deliberate warmth, knowing that the design around you is the result of countless winters survived and remembered. The fire has settled into a steady rhythm now, no longer a timid flicker, but not an unruly blaze either. You sit close enough to feel its warmth on your face, yet far enough that your skin does not sting. The balance is instinctive. Too near and you waste fuel while risking sparks. Too far and the cold creeps back in with quiet determination. You watch the flames lean and sway, responding to subtle drafts you can barely detect. Above the smoke curls upward toward the opening at the peak of the dwelling. The placement of that smoke hole is deliberate. Long before modern ventilation systems, indigenous builders understood that heat rises and smoke must have a clear path out. A widely recognized historical reality shows that tipis were designed with adjustable flaps at the top, allowing families to control airflow depending on wind direction. You imagine someone outside earlier shifting those flaps with practiced hands, aligning them to draw smoke upward, without letting icy gusts rush down. The result is almost elegant. Warm air circulates. Smoke escapes. You breathe without coughing, even in this enclosed space. It is a collaboration between flame and architecture. You extend your hands toward the fire and notice how quickly your fingers regain feeling. The cold had numbed them earlier, turning joints stiff and uncooperative. Now sensation returns in gentle waves. Across from you, an elder feeds the fire with small measured pieces of wood. There is no dramatic tossing of logs. Each addition is considered. Fuel is precious in winter. Wood must be gathered, dried and rationed with foresight. In woodland regions, longhouses often contained multiple hearths spaced along the central corridor. An established historical understanding notes that these fires were aligned to maximize shared warmth, while allowing smoke to rise through vents in the roof. You picture the long interior dimly lit by flickering orange light, families arranged along either side, the glow reflected in watchful eyes. There is a quiet choreography here. Someone stirs embers with a stick, breaking apart clumps to ensure even burning. Another adjusts a hide near the entrance, sealing a slight draft. You realize that maintaining warmth through the night is not a passive act. It requires vigilance but not frantic effort. It is steady, attentive care. A lesser-known anecdote from two early observers describes how some communities would bank their fires at night, covering embers with ash to preserve heat until morning. Instead of letting flames roar and die, they coaxed them into a slow, enduring glow. You can almost see it now, a bed of red coals breathing softly beneath grey powder, waiting to be revived at dawn. There is something intimate about firelight. Faces soften in its glow, shadows stretch along curved walls, the smell of burning wood mingles with the faint scent of hides and earth. Outside, the wind continues its restless wandering, but here, the hearth becomes the emotional centre of the space. Researchers have long examined how central fires shaped social life during winter months. The hearth was not merely a source of heat, it was a gathering point. Meals were prepared here, stories were shared here, decisions were made here. Warmth radiated outward both physically and socially. You shift your weight on the layered floor coverings, feeling the warmth concentrated closest to the centre. The farther from the fire you move, the cooler the air becomes. Sleeping positions are not random. Elders or small children may rest nearer the hearth on the coldest nights. Others adjust accordingly. It is a subtle form of care negotiated without ceremony. You glance upward again at the smoke hole. Snowflakes drift briefly through the opening before melting in the rising warmth. It feels almost magical, yet it is simply physics at work. Hot air rises, cold air sinks. The structure harnesses these truths rather than fighting them. Some historians continue to explore whether variations in hearth placement across different regions reflected environmental necessity or spiritual symbolism. The question lingers in academic circles, but as you sit here feeling the fire's steady pulse, the practical wisdom is undeniable. Heat must be central, it must be tended, it must breathe. The crackling sound becomes soothing, almost hypnotic. Each pop and hiss remind you that warmth requires transformation. Wood becomes ember. Ember becomes ash. Nothing is wasted if managed carefully. You notice how smoke does not linger thickly at ground level. The airflow carries it upward in a consistent stream. The adjustable flaps above respond to subtle shifts in wind direction. If the breeze changes, someone will rise quietly to make a correction. You imagine stepping outside for a moment, cheeks stung by cold, reaching up to tug a cord that repositions the flap just enough to restore balance. It's remarkable how much depends on small adjustments. A slight misalignment and smoke could billow inward. An overly wide opening and precious heat would escape. Precision matters. You draw your robe tighter and lean back slightly, letting the warmth soak into your bones. The firelight dances across the interior walls, illuminating patterns and textures you might otherwise overlook. The space feels alive, sustained by the partnership between structure and flame. As the night deepens, conversation softens into murmurs. Children's voices fade into sleepy whispers. The fire continues its patient work, radiating outward in steady waves. You realize that surviving freezing nights without modern homes does not mean enduring endless discomfort. It means mastering the elements that are available. Wood, air, hide, earth. Each one plays a role. Each one is understood intimately. The hearth glows brighter for a moment as another small log is placed upon the coals. You watch the flames catch, then settle once more into a controlled dance. Outside, the cold remains vast and unyielding. Inside, warmth gathers contained and purposeful. And as you sit there bathed in amber light, you begin to feel that the freezing night is no longer an overwhelming adversary. It is something negotiated hour by hour, flame by flame, breath by breath. The fire burns lower now, steady and patient, and you begin to notice how everyone shifts subtly as the evening deepens. No one announces that it's time to sleep. There is no formal declaration. Instead, bodies begin arranging themselves with quiet familiarity as though guided by an unspoken agreement older than memory. You draw your robe closer and settle onto the layered bedding. Around you others do the same. There are no separate bedrooms, no doors clicking shut. A commonly accepted historical understanding confirms that many Native American families slept in shared spaces, particularly during winter, when conserving heat mattered most. Privacy as you define it today bends gently before the demands of survival. You feel a child curl near your side, small and warm. Across the fire, two elders sit close together, their shoulders nearly touching. Body heat is not an afterthought. It is a resource. When multiple people sleep within a contained space, their combined warmth changes the air itself. The temperature lifts incrementally enough to make the difference between restless shivering and steady rest. You might instinctively crave space, your modern mind whispering about personal boundaries, but here closeness is comfort. You begin to notice how the air near the center of the group feels softer, less sharp against your cheeks. The edges of the dwelling remain cooler, yes, but no one sleeps alone along the outer wall if it can be avoided. An established historical observation suggests that in particularly severe cold families sometimes repositioned bedding so that the youngest and oldest were shielded by others. It is a living barrier, a ring of warmth created through deliberate arrangement. You imagine lying at the outer edge, feeling the cold press faintly at your back, while warmth radiates from those beside you. A small but intriguing detail recorded at Zbgorsici in some oral traditions mentions that people often slept with their heads oriented toward the interior and their feet toward the wall. This positioning may have helped reduce exposure to drafts near the base of the structure. Whether this was universally practiced is uncertain, yet the logic feels plausible as you tuck your chin slightly downward, instinctively protecting your face from cooler air. Researchers continue to explore how communal sleeping influenced social bonds during long winters. Sharing warmth night after night reinforces trust. You cannot remain distant when you wake to the sound of another's breathing inches from your ear. There is vulnerability here, but also reassurance. If someone stirs, you feel it. If a child whimpers from a bad dream, an adult's hand reaches out almost immediately. The fire dims further, embers glowing like a scattered constellation on the ground. Someone quietly rises to adjust the coals, not reigniting a roaring flame but preserving a low, steady heat. You admire the restraint. Excess warmth is unnecessary and wasteful. Controlled warmth sustains. You shift slightly aware of the layers beneath you. Thick robes trap heat close to your body. The air between each hide becomes a small reservoir of warmth. You exhale slowly and notice how the space around your face warms with each breath, especially when you draw the covering just high enough to shield your nose. There is a soft murmur of conversation fading into silence. The wind outside continues its restless song, but within the circle of sleeping bodies a different rhythm takes over. Breathing, slow, even, shared. You realize that communal warmth is not merely physical, it is psychological. The vastness of the winter night feels less intimidating when you are not alone beneath it. The knowledge that others are near, that their warmth touches yours, offers a subtle calm. A widely recognized historical pattern shows that in many cultures across cold regions, communal sleeping arrangements were common well into the modern era. It was not a sign of poverty or primitiveness. It was efficient, practical, sensible in climates where isolation could mean danger. You feel the steady rise and fall of the child's breathing beside you. Across the dim glow, an elder coughs softly, then settles again. No one complains. No one shifts dramatically. Movements are small, respectful, coordinated by instinct. There is also strategy in how bedding is arranged. Heavier robes may be shared across 2 or 3 bodies. Smaller furs are layered where drafts are most likely. If a gust sneaks through an unseen gap, someone adjusts, pulling fabric tighter, closing the circle once more. Some historians have pondered whether communal sleeping in winter also reinforced cultural teachings, allowing story songs and knowledge to flow easily between generations during long nights. The theory feels natural as you imagine a child drifting to sleep while listening to an elder's quiet tale near the fire. Even as eyes close, learning continues. You turn slightly onto your side, pressing your back gently against another warm body. At first it feels unfamiliar, then it feels reassuring. The cold beyond the walls is relentless, but here warmth accumulates through closeness. The embers pulse faintly, casting a reddish glow across faces now relaxed in sleep. The air smells of smoke and fur, and the faint trace of wood ash is not pristine or sterile, it is real, lived in. You think about how modern heating systems allow you to sleep alone in separate rooms, temperatures regulated by unseen mechanisms. Here warmth is tangible, you feel it from the fire, you feel it from the bodies around you. You're part of the system, not merely benefiting from it. As the night stretches on, the cold presses steadily against hide and bark. Yet within this shared circle you remain suspended in a pocket of human heat. You begin to sense that surviving freezing nights is not solely about materials or architecture. It is about community, about choosing to gather close rather than scatter. Your eyelids grow heavier. The wind's howl becomes distant, almost soothing. Surrounded by quiet breathing and layered warmth, you drift deeper into the night, held not by walls alone, but by the steady presence of those beside you. You wake briefly in the night, not because you are cold, but because someone nearby shifts, and the shared warmth rearranges itself. The fire has sunk into a low bed of embers, glowing softly like watchful eyes in the dark. You notice that even in sleep, most people have not removed much of their clothing. It might surprise you, but garments here are not simply daytime attire. They are part of the nighttime defense. A broadly supported historical record shows that many indigenous communities in colder regions wore layers made from animal hides and furs that were designed to retain heat in harsh climates. Those same layers often remained on after sunset, becoming an extension of bedding. You glance down at your own covering. Beneath the heavy robe, you still wear a tunic of soft hide. The inside is lined with the fur, turned inward to trap warmth against your skin. Your legs are wrapped in fitted leggings. Your feet remain inside moccasins or thick socks, depending on the region. There is no dramatic change into lighter sleepwear. The cold does not pause for comfort rituals. You pull your hands closer to your chest and feel the texture of the material. It is supple, moulded by movement over time. Unlike modern fabrics that are mass-produced, each piece here was shaped by individual hands. Hides were scraped, stretched, smoked, softened. The process itself required patience and skill. In some communities, tanning hides for winter clothing was considered a crucial and respected task, often passed from one generation to the next. A small but intriguing detail preserved in certain accounts mentions that in especially severe cold people sometimes slept with their hoods up or with fur caps still on their heads. Heat escapes quickly from the scalp. You instinctively tug a hood closer around your temples and feel the difference. Your ears warm almost immediately. The materials vary across regions. In Arctic areas, caribou fur was prized because of its hollow hairs, which trapped air efficiently. On the plains, buffalo robes provided unmatched insulation. In forested regions, deer and elk hides were common, sometimes layered for added protection. The science is simple yet effective. Fur holds air, air holds warmth. Experts who study historical clothing traditions note that garments were often tailored specifically for winter use, with seams positioned to minimize exposure to wind. Stitching was tight, sometimes sealed with sinew thread that swelled slightly when damp, closing tiny gaps. You imagine running your finger along a seam, marveling at the care taken in something as small as a stitch. There is also practicality in how clothing doubles as bedding. When mobility is essential, such as in nomadic communities, heavy permanent bedding is less convenient. Instead, you carry your insulation on your body. At night, you add a robe or blanket on top, creating layers that can be removed quickly if needed. The system is flexible. Some historians continue to explore whether certain winter garments were influenced by intertribal trade or developed independently in response to similar environmental pressures. Patterns of beadwork or cut may differ, yet the core principle remains consistent. Warmth is achieved through layering and thoughtful construction. You roll slightly onto your side and feel the reassuring weight of fur against your cheek. It is soft, almost luxurious in its thickness. The idea that survival gear can also feel comforting might surprise you. There is no sharp division between utility and comfort. They merge seamlessly. Across the dim interior, someone adjusts their robe, pulling it higher over their shoulders. No one fully undresses. Exposure would invite unnecessary heat loss. Even children remain bundled, their smaller bodies requiring careful protection. An interesting aside found in certain early traveller descriptions recounts how some observers underestimated the sophistication of indigenous winter clothing, assuming it to be crude simply because it lacked woven cloth. Yet the thermal efficiency of well-prepared fur often surpassed that of early European textiles in extreme cold. You might smile at that quiet irony as you snuggle deeper into your layered coverings. You notice how your breath warms the space beneath the robe. The small pocket of air near your face becomes a miniature climate zone. You tuck the edge carefully under your chin, sealing in warmth without restricting airflow. The ground beneath remains cold, but the combination of clothing and bedding creates a buffer. Your body heat radiates outward, captured by the fur and reflected back toward you. It is a gentle cycle sustained as long as you remain sheltered and fed. A generally accepted academic perspective emphasizes that clothing technology was central to survival in pre-industrial winter environments. Without effective garments, even the best shelter would fail to protect against prolonged exposure. Here, clothing is a architecture in miniature built to move with you. The fire gives a soft crackle as a small log shifts inward. The warmth pulses faintly across your face. You flex your toes inside thick coverings and feel no sting of frost. Instead, there is a steady, manageable coolness balanced by layers of insulation. You realize that the line between day and night is less rigid here. The same garments that shield you during hunting or gathering now shield you in sleep. You are never truly separate from your protective layers. Outside, the cold remains vast and indifferent. Inside, you rest wrapped in materials shaped by knowledge, patience, and deep familiarity with the land. The freezing night is not conquered through brute force. It is negotiated through preparation, through layers that hold warmth close to skin and spirit alike. You let your breathing slow again, aware that your clothing is not merely fabric or fur. It is the quiet guardian that stays with you even in dreams, ensuring that when morning comes, you wake ready to face the frost once more. You wake before dawn, not because of cold, but because the air feels different, thicker, still. The fire has faded to a low red glow, and yet the chill is not as sharp as you expect. There is a steadiness to the temperature, a kind of underground calm. You realize you are no longer imagining a structure perched lightly on open ground. You are stepping into a different kind of winter home altogether. You descend a few packed earth steps into a semi-subterranean lodge. The ceiling arches above you, supported by heavy beams, then covered in layers of brush hides and soil. From the outside, it would appear almost like a low mound rising gently from the landscape. Snow rests across its surface without melting quickly. That snow is not brushed away in panic. It becomes part of the insulation. A well-established historical understanding confirms that several plains and plateau communities built earth lodges designed specifically for colder months. By sinking part of the structure into the ground, they took advantage of the Earth's relatively stable temperature. Even when the air above drops drastically, the soil below remains less extreme. You press your palm to the packed wall and feel the difference. It is cool, yes, but not biting. Inside, the space feels enclosed in a different way than the tipi. The air does not swirl as freely. Sound is muffled. The wind outside may howl across the plains, but here beneath layers of soil and snow you hear only a distant murmur. It feels almost like being inside the land itself. The central fire pit remains, but the smoke hole above is smaller and carefully reinforced. The roof opening is engineered to allow smoke to escape while minimizing heat loss. You watch a thin line of smoke rise, twisting toward daylight, that filters faintly from above. The balance between ventilation and warmth is delicate. Too small an opening and the interior would grow stifling. Too wide and precious heat would vanish upward. Archaeological research has shown that some earth lodges were built with remarkable structural precision, using massive wooden posts anchored deeply for stability. These were not temporary shelters thrown together in haste. They were long-term investments in winter survival. You imagine the effort required to gather timber-shaped beams and mound earth across the roof. A lesser-known detail recorded in excavation findings suggests that certain lodges included storage pits dug into the floor line to preserve food through freezing months. You glance toward a shallow depression near the wall and picture dried corn or stored roots resting safely below ground level. The same earth that shields you from cold also protects sustenance. You sit near the central hearth and notice how warmth accumulates more evenly in this enclosed space. The thick earthen walls absorb heat slowly, then release it gradually. It is a natural form of thermal mass. Once warmed, the structure holds onto that energy longer than a thin hide covering would. Some historians continue to examine whether the shift to more permanent winter lodges in certain regions reflected environmental necessity, social organization, or agricultural stability. The discussion remains lively among scholars, but as you sit here feeling the gentle consistency of temperature, the practicality speaks for itself. The interior smells faintly of soilwood smoke and stored grain. It is not unpleasant, it is grounding. You run your fingers along the wall and feel the texture of packed clay smoothed by hand. There is an intimacy to living inside something shaped directly from the earth beneath your feet. Light filters softly through the smoke hole, illuminating particles of ash drifting lazily downward. Children stir nearby, their breaths visible, but less dramatic than in open-air dwellings. You realize that even when the fire dims, the lodge does not surrender warmth immediately. It gives you time to rekindle embers, time to wake gradually. An intriguing note from early observers describes how some earth lodges were arranged in circular villages positioned strategically near rivers, yet elevated enough to avoid flooding. Winter settlement was not random. It required foresight about wind direction, water access, and defensive visibility. Even in stillness there is awareness. You imagine stepping outside briefly. The cold strikes sharply, startling after the muted interior. Snow crunches beneath your feet. The lodge rises from the ground like a quiet guardian, its rounded shape deflecting wind. From a distance it blends into the winter landscape, modest and unassuming. Back inside, you lower yourself onto thick bedding arranged along the wall. The curvature of the space creates subtle pockets where warmth lingers. There are no sharp corners for cold air to collect. The geometry feels intentional. A commonly accepted academic view highlights that such earth-sheltered homes demonstrate sophisticated environmental adaptation rather than primitive improvisation. The design reflects an understanding of insulation, airflow, and structural stability refined through generations of experience. You stretch your legs and feel the reassuring solidity beneath you. The ground is not an enemy here, it is an ally. By embracing it rather than standing entirely above it, the lodge transforms winter from an external assault into a manageable condition. The fire crackles softly as someone adds a small piece of wood. Heat radiates outward, absorbed by walls that will return it slowly through the night. The air remains calm, predictable. You settle deeper into the earthen embrace, aware that survival through freezing nights can look different depending on region and tradition. In this lodge, winter feels less like something endured and more like something accommodated. The land above lies succulent under snow. Beneath it, within this rounded chamber, life continues steadily, breath by breath, ember by ember. When you step back outside after time within the earth lodge, the cold greets you with a sharp clarity that almost steals your breath. The sky is pale with early light, and the snow stretches across the land like an endless white blanket. Instinct might tell you that snow is the enemy, a symbol of hardship and danger. Yet as you stand there, you begin to understand that it can also be an ally. You kneel and scoop up a handful. It compresses easily between your gloves. Beneath its fragile sparkle lies something powerful. Snow, when packed tightly, traps tiny pockets of air. Those air pockets slow the movement of heat. In other words, snow can insulate. This is not a romantic exaggeration. It is a physical reality observed in many cold weather cultures. Ethnographic research has long noted that some indigenous communities use snow strategically around their winter dwellings. Instead of clearing every drift away, they sometimes allowed snow to accumulate against the outer walls, reinforcing insulation. The drift becomes a protective layer, reducing wind penetration and sealing small gaps. You imagine brushing snow carefully along the base of a lodge, not in frustration but with purpose. There are even accounts from far northern regions describing temporary snow structures built for short-term shelter. While more commonly associated with Arctic peoples, the principle of shaping snow into protective forms was widely understood across cold climates. When properly compacted snow walls can block wind effectively. The key is density. Loose snow offers little defense. Packed snow transforms into a surprisingly sturdy barrier. You walk along the edge of a dwelling and run your hand along a bank of snow pressed gently against its side. It feels solid, almost like a pale extension of the wall itself. The wind strikes the drift first, losing strength before it ever touches hide or bark. Some researchers have explored how winter landscapes influence settlement patterns, suggesting that communities often selected areas where natural snow accumulation could enhance shelter rather than hinder it. The interplay between topography and snowfall becomes part of architectural planning. A shallow depression might collect drifts in helpful ways, while an exposed ridge could strip snow away entirely. You pause and listen. The snow muffles sound. Footsteps become softer. The usual echo of voices carries less distance. There is a quiet that blankets everything, not just visually, but acoustically. That silence contributes to a sense of containment. The world feels smaller, more intimate. A lesser-known observation from early travellers recounts how some families stored food beneath snow, intentionally using it as a natural refrigeration system. Frozen meat sealed carefully could remain preserved for extended periods. You imagine uncovering such a cache, brushing aside powdery layers to reveal sustenance protected by the very cold that threatens comfort. The idea that snow could preserve as well as endanger challenges modern assumptions. You might be used to seeing it as inconvenient, something to shovel from driveways. Here it becomes a tool. Academic discussions sometimes circle around whether the deliberate use of snow as insulation developed through experimentation or through long-inherited tradition. The precise origins are difficult to trace. What remains clear is that people observed their environment closely. They did not treat snow as a uniform obstacle. They studied its behavior. You crouch near the entrance of a winter dwelling and notice how the threshold is kept clear while the sides are reinforced with drift. Access remains practical, but protection increases. It is a careful compromise. Children move across the snow with surprising ease. Their moccasins press patterns into the surface. They know where drifts are deep and where crust has hardened. There is no dramatic flailing or exaggerated fear. Snow is part of their seasonal vocabulary. You glance toward the open landscape beyond the settlement. The white expanse reflects sunlight intensely, making the cold appear almost luminous. At night, that same snow will reflect moonlight, brightening darkness. Even in deep winter, there is a kind of glow. There are stories preserved in some communities about reading the quality of snow by touch and sound. A certain squeak beneath your foot signals dry, intense cold. A softer crunch suggests different conditions. You test it yourself, pressing down and listening to the faint cry beneath your boot. It tells you something about the air temperature, about the way crystals have formed. Rather than fighting the snow endlessly, families adapt to its presence. They move paths where needed. They reinforce walls where helpful. They leave protective drifts intact. Scholars examining winter survival strategies often emphasize that success depended on flexibility. When snow piled too heavily on a roof and it was cleared to prevent collapse, when it formed a helpful barrier, it was left undisturbed. Judgment mattered more than rigid rules. You brush your glove against your sleeve, scattering a few sparkling flakes. They melt slowly against the warmth of your skin. It strikes you how something so delicate can serve as both shield and threat. As evening approaches, again you return inside. The snow remains banked around the exterior, muting wind and sealing edges. Within the dwelling, the fire glows steadily, unaware that part of its effectiveness now depends on frozen water pressed against the walls. You settle near the hearth and glance toward the entrance. Beyond it lies a landscape of white, silent and vast. Yet instead of feeling exposed, you feel supported. The snow outside is no longer a simple adversary. It is a quiet collaborator in the effort to keep warmth within. The freezing night will return with its steady grip. But wrapped in hides sheltered by earth and wood and reinforced by carefully shaped drifts, you understand that winter survival is not about conquering nature. It is about recognizing that even snow, when understood properly, can stand on your side. Night settles again, but this time you remain awake a little longer, listening. The fire has been banked carefully, its glow steady and low. The walls hold warmth. Snow rests quietly outside. Yet beyond insulation and embers, another layer of survival unfolds in the dark. You hear it first as a distant hum. The wind moving across open land produces different tones depending on what it touches. Over grasslands it whispers, through trees it sighs, against packed snow it sometimes produces a faint crystalline hiss. You lie still, letting your ears adjust. In winter, sound carries differently. The cold air sharpens it. A well-documented historical reality shows that many indigenous communities developed acute environmental listening skills, particularly during long winter nights when visibility was limited. You imagine living without electric light, without the constant background noise of engines or distant highways. The world becomes quieter, and in that quiet subtle changes stand out. A crack of ice shifting along a river can echo across surprising distances. The snap of a branch might signal nothing more than temperature change, or it might mean something larger is moving nearby. Your body remains relaxed, but your mind stays aware. Inside the dwelling, someone stirs softly. There is no panic. Instead, a quiet exchange of glances in the dim glow. Not every sound requires action. Experience teaches discernment. Overreaction wastes energy. Ignoring danger invites risk. The balance lies in interpretation. You hear a faint rhythmic crunch beyond the walls. Not wind this time. Heavier, deliberate. Perhaps a deer moving cautiously across crusted snow. Perhaps something else. Your pulse lifts slightly, but no one leaps to their feet. Instead, one person near the entrance shifts position, listening more intently. Ethnographic accounts indicate that some communities rotated subtle night watch responsibilities during periods of heightened risk, especially when food stores were vulnerable or when intertribal tensions existed. The watch was rarely dramatic. It was quiet vigilance. Someone closer to the entrance might remain lighter in sleep, ready to respond if needed. The crunching fades. The wind resumes its steady tone. You exhale slowly. There is also comfort in familiar sounds, the crackle of embers, the soft breathing of those around you. A child murmurs in a dream. The structure creaks faintly as temperatures shift. These sounds form a map of normalcy. When something falls outside that pattern, it is noticed. Wind might be understood as the voice of a spirit. The howl of wind might be understood as the voice of a spirit moving across the land. The cracking of ice could be framed within storytelling traditions that gave meaning to natural phenomena. Whether taken literally or metaphorically, such interpretations offered emotional grounding. The night was not empty, it was inhabited. Researchers who study sensory history often emphasize that pre-industrial communities relied more heavily on auditory awareness than modern urban dwellers do. Without artificial lighting to extend activity deep into the night, darkness became a realm navigated through hearing as much as sight. You adjust your position slightly, and notice how the snow outside dampens certain noises while amplifying others. Footsteps on bare earth would sound dull and muted. On frozen crust they announce themselves sharply. The landscape itself becomes an acoustic partner. A generally accepted scholarly view suggests that winter encampments were often positioned with natural advantages in mind, including clear lines of sight and sound. Proximity to a river might provide water, but also an audible barrier if ice shifted. Dense tree lines could block wind yet conceal approaching figures. Each choice carried trade-offs. You find yourself attuned to the rhythm of the night. The wind swells, then eases. The fire settles. A log shifts inward with a gentle thud. Outside, perhaps an owl calls once its sound travelling far in the crisp air. There is something deeply human about this listening. You are not merely waiting for danger. You are participating in the life of the night. The cold does not silence the world entirely, it refines it. Some historians continue to examine how winter storytelling traditions intertwined with environmental awareness. Tales told near the hearth often included references to sounds in the dark, teaching children what to fear, what to ignore, and what to respect. Education blended seamlessly with comfort. You close your eyes briefly and focus on the cadence of breathing around you. It forms a steady undercurrent beneath the shifting wind. You realize that vigilance does not have to be tense. It can be calm, observant without alarm. The freezing night stretches on vast beyond the shelter walls. Yet within this small circle of warmth, listening becomes a quiet form of protection. Ears replace windows, instinct replaces electric alarms. Another faint sound brushes the edge of your awareness, then dissolves into the broader hush. No one moves this time. The pattern holds. All is well. Gradually your attention softens. The wind becomes background once more. The crackle of embers fades into a distant rhythm. Snow rests heavily on the landscape, absorbing light, muting the world. Wrapped in layers of hide, sheltered by thoughtful design, surrounded by steady breathing, you drift back towards sleep, knowing that even in darkness awareness stands quietly guard. Morning arrives slowly, not with a blaze of golden light, but with a pale glow filtering through the smoke hole above. You stir and notice immediately that your stomach feels hollow. The cold has a way of sharpening hunger. Surviving freezing nights is not only about shelter and warmth, it is also about fuel. You sit up carefully, brushing ash from your sleeve, and watch as someone near the hearth begins coaxing the embers back into flame. A small bundle of kindling catches and warmth begins its gradual return. Nearby food is already being prepared. A broadly recognized historical fact reveals that winter diets in many Native American communities shifted toward calorie-dense and preserved foods. Fresh produce was limited, so families relied on dried meat, rendered fat, stored grains, and preserved vegetables. You imagine strips of venison hanging earlier in the season, now carefully rationed and rehydrated near the fire. The smell reaches you first, savoury, rich. Someone drops small pieces of dried meat into a pot suspended above the flame. Perhaps cornmeal is added, thickening the mixture into something hearty and sustaining. In some plains communities, a mixture of dried meat pounded with fat and sometimes berries formed what later became widely known as pemmican. It was compact, durable, and extraordinarily energy-rich. You hold a small portion in your hands once it is ready. It is not delicate cuisine. It is purposeful. The first bite feels dense, satisfying. You can almost sense your body responding, warmth spreading outward from your core. In freezing conditions, calories become internal fire. Nutritional historians have often pointed out that a high-fat intake during winter was not indulgent but necessary. Fat burns slowly, providing sustained energy and helping the body maintain heat. You swallow and feel gratitude for the careful preservation that made this meal possible. A lesser-known observation recorded in some regional accounts describes how certain families stored berries mixed with animal fat in tightly sealed containers, allowing them to retain nutrients deep into winter. The combination may sound unusual to modern taste, yet it provided both sweetness and energy at a time when fresh fruit was unavailable. You glance toward a storage pit near the wall and consider the planning involved. Food gathering in late summer and autumn was not random. It was calculated against the long stretch of winter nights ahead. Every dried strip of meat, every woven basket of corn represented foresight. Some scholars continue to explore how variations in winter diet reflected ecological diversity rather than cultural hierarchy. Communities near rivers might rely more heavily on preserved fish. Those on open plains depended on large game. Woodland groups incorporated nuts and roots gathered earlier in the year. There was no single winter menu. Adaptation shaped favour as much as tradition did. You take another bite, feeling strength return to your limbs. Hunger in cold weather is not subtle, it presses insistently. Children nearby eat eagerly, their cheeks flushed from both warmth and appetite. There is also ritual in this morning meal. It is not rushed. Even in winter, there is space for quiet gratitude. Some communities express thanks through spoken words, others through simple gestures or shared silence. The acknowledgement of food's importance is woven into daily rhythm. An intriguing tidbit preserved in certain oral traditions suggests that hunters sometimes consumed small portions of raw fat before venturing out into extreme cold, believing it provided immediate warmth and endurance. Modern nutritional science would nod knowingly at that instinct. Fat metabolizes efficiently, releasing sustained energy. You wrap your hands around a wooden bowl and let the heat seep into your fingers. The contrast between cold air and warm food heightens your awareness. Each swallow feels like protection. The fire crackles gently as steam rises from the pot. Outside, the snow reflects growing daylight. The freezing night has passed, but winter remains. Surviving one evening does not mean complacency. Each day requires replenishment. Researchers studying historical subsistence patterns often emphasize that winter survival depended on meticulous preparation months in advance. Famine rarely resulted from a single bad night. It stemmed from failed harvests, disrupted hunts, or miscalculated storage. The connection between autumn labour and winter comfort is direct and unforgiving. You notice how portions are measured carefully. No one overeats recklessly, supplies must last, yet no one goes without what they need either. Balance again reveals itself as the quiet theme of survival. A child licks grease from their fingers, smiling faintly. The warmth in the lodge feels deeper now, supported not only by fare but by nourishment. Internal heat joins external heat, strengthening the body's resilience. You rise slowly, feeling steadier. Outside, the day will bring its own challenges. Snow must be navigated, wood gathered, perhaps hunting attempted if stores allow. But for now, you sit in the gentle glow of morning light and understand that food is not separate from shelter. The freezing night may test walls and robes, but it also tests stomachs. Without adequate fuel, even the best insulated lodge cannot prevent chill from creeping inward. You finish the last bite and set the bowl aside. Around you, others do the same. Conversation resumes softly. Plans for the day begin forming in loathsome tones. The cold still waits beyond the walls, vast and patient. Yet within this circle of warmth and nourishment, you feel prepared to face it once more. Later that day, you step carefully across the snow toward a shallow rise beyond the main dwellings. The air is bright and sharp sunlight reflecting off the white ground so intensely that you narrow your eyes. You follow someone who walks with quiet purpose, carrying a simple tool in hand. You stop near a patch of snow that looks undisturbed except for a subtle marker, perhaps a branch placed deliberately or a faint depression only trained eyes would notice. With steady movements, the snow is brushed aside. Beneath it, the surface of frozen earth appears. A few more careful scrapes and something solid is revealed. A wrapped bundle emerges stiff with cold. A widely acknowledged historical observation notes that many indigenous communities used winter's natural freezing conditions as a preservation system. In regions where temperatures remained well below freezing for extended periods, meat could be stored outdoors, sealed carefully, to protect it from scavengers and contamination. Snow and ice functioned as a natural freezer long before mechanical refrigeration existed. You kneel and watch as the bundle is lifted. The outer wrapping, perhaps hide or woven fibre, is checked for damage. Everything must be secure. Animals roam in winter, driven by hunger as much as humans are. Protection of food stores is constant work. The bundle is carried back toward the lodge. As you walk, you consider the planning behind this quiet act. Meat harvested weeks earlier, dried partially, or left frozen whole is now retrieved at exactly the right moment. Timing matters. Too early and supplies dwindle too quickly. Too late and hunger presses harder than necessary. Some researchers emphasize that winter food storage required deep environmental awareness. Knowing where to place a cache involved understanding sun exposure, prevailing winds, and animal movement patterns. A shaded north-facing slope might preserve frozen meat longer than an exposed ridge. You glance back at the spot and realize it was not chosen randomly. Inside the lodge, the frozen bundle is unwrapped carefully. the meat is firmly rigid. A section is cut away with practiced efficiency. The rest is rewrapped and returned to its snowy vault. Waste is avoided. There is also an understanding of rotation. Certain foods are consumed earlier in the season, others later. Dried provisions may last longer than frozen ones. Stored corn might be guarded carefully for the deepest part of winter when hunting becomes more difficult. An interesting detail preserved in some early records describes how fish were sometimes stored upright in frozen ground tail down, protected by snow until needed. The image feels almost surreal, like nature itself transformed into a pantry. Historians continued to explore how climate variability influenced storage practices. During milder winters, thawing and refreezing could complicate preservation. In harsher years, extreme cold extended storage potential, but made retrieval more physically demanding. Adaptation required constant assessment rather than rigid routine. You sit near the hearth, again, as small pieces of the retrieved meat begin to thaw. The smell deepens as it warms. Hunger stirs faintly in your belly despite the earlier meal. Children watch with interest, aware that each portion connects back to earlier hunts. Survival is cyclical. The hunt feeds the cache feeds the winter. Winter sustains the people until the land shifts once more toward growth. A generally accepted academic perspective holds that effective food storage strategies were among the most critical factors in surviving prolonged cold seasons. Without reliable preservation, even skilled hunters would struggle to provide consistent nourishment once snow deepened and game dispersed. You notice how no one treats the stored meat casually. It is handled with respect. There is recognition that the animal's life continues to support the community long after the hunt. Outside, the snow glitters beneath a pale sun. The cold remains constant, yet it now feels less threatening. You have seen how the very temperature that could harm you also safeguards your food. As the thawed meat begins to sizzle lightly above the fire, you reflect on the quiet ingenuity of using winter itself as an ally. There are no humming appliances here. No insulated metal doors sealing in cold air. Instead, there is snow earth and attentive observation. A faint breeze stirs outside, carrying powdery flakes across the surface. The cache remains hidden once more beneath its white covering, secure until called upon again. You realize that surviving freezing nights depends not only on what happens within the shelter, but also on what waits patiently beyond it. Snow becomes storage, ice becomes protection, cold becomes preservation. You take a small portion of warmed meat and feel its strength return to your body. The cycle continues. Hunt, store, retrieve, nourish. As afternoon light begins to fade toward evening once more, you sense that the knowledge surrounding winter food is as layered as the hides on the walls, each method refined through observation, each decision shaped by experience. The freezing night will return soon enough, but with caches secured beneath snow and provisions measured wisely, you face it with steady confidence rather than fear. The afternoon fades gently into blue-grey twilight, and you notice how the children remain outside a little longer than you might expect. The cold is sharp, yet they move across the snow with steady confidence. Their cheeks are flushed, their laughter quick and bright against the quiet landscape. You might imagine that childhood in such conditions would be defined only by fragility. Yet long-term anthropological research indicates that children in many native communities were introduced gradually to the realities of winter from an early age. Exposure was careful, never reckless, but it was intentional. Strength and awareness were cultivated step by step. You watch a small group of practice walking across crusted snow without breaking through. They test each step, feeling for firmness. An older child demonstrates how to shift weight, gently distributing pressure across the surface. This is not framed as a formal lesson. It unfolds naturally, woven into play. Inside the lodge, a younger child sits near the fire, carefully watching an adult mend a tear in a hide. The needle passes through thick material with practiced ease. The child's eyes follow each motion. Skill is absorbed long before it is formally explained. A widely accepted historical insight notes that survival knowledge in many indigenous societies was transmitted experientially rather than through rigid instruction. Children learned by observing, assisting, and gradually taking on responsibility. Winter accelerated that learning. Mistakes carried consequences, so awareness was encouraged early. You step closer to the fire and hear a quiet conversation between an elder and a child about wind direction. The elder gestures toward the smoke hole, explaining how shifting gusts can be detected by watching how smoke leans. It feels almost like a gentle science lesson, though no one uses that word. An intriguing anecdote preserved in some community stories describes children being tasked with listening for specific night sounds as part of a game. They would identify whether a noise came from wind animal movement or shifting ice. The game sharpened their senses while easing fear, learning disguised as play. Scholars examining childhood in pre-industrial societies often point out that competence was expected earlier than in many modern contexts, yet nurturing remained central. You see that balance now. A child who ventures too far into the snow is called back calmly, not scolded harshly. Boundaries are firm but kind. As evening deepens, the younger ones are guided inside. Wet moccasins are dried near the fire. Robes are adjusted carefully around small shoulders. You notice how bedding positions shift slightly to ensure that children rest within the warmest zone. Some researchers continue to discuss how winter storytelling reinforced practical knowledge for the young. Tales of animals surviving cold or spirits travelling through snow often contained embedded lessons about caution and respect. The line between myth and instruction blurs softly. You sit near a child who is tracing patterns in the dirt floor with a small stick. The shapes resemble the curved walls of the lodge. Perhaps they are imagining future shelters. Perhaps they are simply copying what they see. Either way, familiarity with structure becomes second nature. A firmly grounded historical perspective emphasizes that winter survival depended not on isolated heroes, but on collective capability. That capability had to be cultivated from childhood. You begin to understand that resilience is not improvised in adulthood. It is nurtured quietly over years. The fire glows warmly as someone hands a child through a small portion of dried meat. The child eats slowly, watching the adults. No one hoards, no one is excluded. Food distribution models fairness and foresight. Outside, the wind gathers strength, briefly rattling the outer covering of the dwelling. A younger child looks up, eyes wide for a moment. An adult places a steady hand on their shoulder, offering reassurance without words. The structure holds. The sound passes. Historians continue to examine how early exposure to environmental challenges shaped psychological resilience. Growing accustomed to cold, to darkness, to shifting seasons may have reduced anxiety when conditions intensified. You see a glimpse of that now in the calm expressions around you. You recall how earlier you felt startled by this wind's voice. The children here barely react. For them, winter is not an abstract danger. It is a familiar presence. As the youngest drift towards sleep, you notice how they are positioned carefully between adults or older siblings. Layers are tucked snugly around them. Protection is physical and relational at once. You reflect on how modern childhood often shields young people from discomfort entirely. Here, discomfort is managed, not erased. Children learn to respect the cold without being overwhelmed by it. The embers glow steadily. Breathing grows softer. Small hand reaches out in sleep and finds the reassuring warmth of another body. In the quiet that follows, you realize that surviving freezing nights without modern homes depends on continuity. Knowledge passed gently from elder to child. Skills practiced playfully until they become instinct. The wind continues beyond the walls, but inside a new generation absorbs the rhythm of winter, preparing to carry it forward long after these particular embers fade. The night stretches long and unhurried, and once the youngest have drifted fully into sleep, a softer energy fills the lodge. The fire is coaxed slightly brighter, not enough to waste wood, just enough to paint the curved walls in warm amber light. You sense that this is the hour when stories begin to move through the air like another form of heat. You settle more comfortably, pulling your robe close, and turn your attention toward an elder whose voice carries a gentle steadiness. The cold remains as outside, pressing against earth and hide, but inside language becomes a kind of shelter. A widely recognized historical understanding affirms that storytelling played a central role in winter life across many indigenous communities. The colder months, when travel lessened and evenings lengthened, created space for narratives to be shared and remembered. These were not idle tales. They carried history, moral guidance, humor, and ecological wisdom. The elder begins without grand introduction. The voice is calm, almost rhythmic, rising and falling like breath. You notice how children, though drowsy, remain attentive. Even adults lean in, slightly drawn by familiarity. The story might speak of an animal who survived a harsh winter by listening carefully to the wind, or of a trickster figure who underestimated the cold and learned humility the hard way. The lesson is woven into the imagery, not announced directly. You find yourself smiling faintly at a moment of quiet humor. Ethnographers have long noted that winter storytelling traditions were often reserved for specific seasons. In some cultures, certain tales were only told when snow lay on the ground. The cold months granted permission. You imagine how the return of winter each year signaled not only environmental change but narrative renewal. There is also comfort in repetition. A story heard many times does not lose its warmth. It deepens. You anticipate certain turns in the tale, yet still feel soothed by hearing them again. Familiar words become like the steady glow of embers. An intriguing detail recorded in several communities suggests that stories were sometimes used deliberately to ease fear of winter sounds. A cracking tree branch might be framed within a mythic explanation, transforming anxiety into understanding. Whether one believes the story literally or symbolically, the effect is grounding. You glance toward the entrance as wind brushes faintly against the outer wall. The sound seems less ominous now. It feels folded into the rhythm of the elder's voice. Some historians continue to explore how oral traditions functioned as repositories of survival knowledge. Embedded within tales were instructions about migration timing, animal behavior, and seasonal hazards. Entertainment and education were not separate categories. You feel the warmth of the fire on one side of your face and the reassuring presence of others on the other side. The lodge becomes not just a physical barrier against cold, but an echo chamber for memory. The elder pauses briefly, then resumes, voice lowering as the story approaches its quiet conclusion. The cadence slows. Even the embers seem to settle in response. A respected academic perspective emphasizes that communal storytelling during winter reinforced social cohesion. Shared narratives reminded everyone of collective identity, especially during seasons when isolation might otherwise creep in. You sense that unity now subtle but steady. One of the children shifts closer to an adult, eyes half closed yet still listening. The story does not demand full alertness. It allows drifting. It welcomes sleep gently. You notice how the air inside feels warmer during these moments, not only from fire and bodies, but from attention itself. Listening together creates a kind of emotional insulation. Outside, the snow reflects faint moonlight. Inside, shadows dance along the curved walls, echoing the movement of the flames. The world feels smaller, safer. The elder finishes with a soft closing phrase. No applause follows, no dramatic reaction. Instead, a few nods, a murmur of appreciation, and a shared silence that lingers. Researchers studying psychological resilience often note that narrative meaning can reduce stress in harsh environments. Framing adversity within story provides perspective. You feel that truth quietly now. Winter remains vast, but it no longer feels overwhelming. The fire dims again, returning to its patient glow. Adults settle more deeply into their bedding. Children finally surrender fully to sleep. You lie back and replay fragments of the tale in your mind. Images of animals moving through snow, of winds carrying lessons, of cleverness and humility. Surviving freezing nights is not only about walls and robes and stored food, it is also about spirit, about finding warmth in shared memory. As your eyelids grow heavy, the elder's voice fades into the background of crackling embers and steady breathing. The cold presses beyond the lodge, but within stories linger, like a final layer of insulation. You drift towards sleep, knowing that when morning comes, the narrative will continue in daily actions and careful listening in quiet preparation for another long winter night. The following day unfolds in pale light, and though the cold remains firm, there is movement beyond the immediate circle of the lodge. Winter does not seal communities entirely in isolation. You step outside and notice tracks in the snow that do not belong solely to your household. They lead toward a neighboring settlement, faint but deliberate. A firmly grounded historical perspective confirms that trade networks among Native American communities continued even during colder months, though, often with adjustments for weather and distance. Exchanges of furs, tools, preserved foods, and crafted goods did not vanish when snow arrived. In many regions, winter travel could even become more predictable once marshy ground froze solid. You imagine yourself walking along a pack trail, breath-visible boots pressing into hardened snow. The cold air sharpens your senses. Each step requires awareness of terrain hidden beneath white cover. Frozen rivers may serve as temporary highways smoother than forest paths once ice thickens. You carry a small bundle, perhaps dried meat or a crafted item intended for exchange. Trade is not merely economic, it reinforces relationships. In harsh seasons, connection matters as much as material goods. Anthropological studies have long shown that intertribal trade networks stretched across vast distances well before European contact. Obsidian shells, copper, and foodstuffs travelled far from their origins. Winter did not halt this movement entirely. Instead, it reshaped routes and rhythms. You pause along the way and notice how snow dampens sound, creating a sense of stillness. Yet the sight of distant smoke rising from another settlement signals life and warmth beyond your own dwelling. A curious detail preserved in some regional accounts describes how certain winter gatherings became opportunities for storytelling exchanges and ceremonial observances alongside trade. Goods changed hands, but so did news and knowledge. The season of cold became paradoxically a time of concentrated social contact in some areas. You arrive at a neighbouring lodge and are greeted not with suspicion but measured welcome. Faces are familiar, hands gesture toward the hearth. Inside, the warmth feels slightly different, shaped by another family's patterns and materials. Bundles are opened carefully. Furs are inspected with experienced fingers. The quality of stitching is noted. Dried fish from a rivering community might be exchanged for bison meat from the plains. Corn stored in woven baskets might travel in one direction while crafted tools move in another. Scholars continue to examine how winter trade strengthened alliances and reduced risk during periods when local resources might fluctuate. Sharing abundance across regions created resilience. No single community relied entirely on its own stores when relationships allowed for exchange. You sit near the fire in this neighbouring lodge and listen to quiet conversation, news of hunting success, observations about shifting weather patterns, perhaps mention of distant groups encountered earlier in the season. The cold outside remains unchanged, but inside warmth multiplies through cooperation. You realise that surviving freezing nights without modern homes depended not only on internal preparation but also on external connection. An established historical insight suggests that social networks often functioned as safety nets in pre-industrial societies. When one group faced scarcity, others might assist strengthening reciprocal bonds for the future. You watch as children from both households observe the exchange. They absorb more than goods. They witness diplomacy in action. They see how generosity and caution coexist. The fire crackles and steam rises from a shared pot placed at the centre. Hospitality accompanies trade. No one is rushed away into the cold without warmth and food. There are debates among historians about how frequently winter trade occurred in various regions, given the challenges of travel. Some argue it was limited to necessity, while others point to evidence of sustained seasonal movement. The precise patterns vary by geography and culture, yet the existence of exchange is well documented. As the visit concludes, goods are wrapped carefully once more. Gratitude is expressed through gestures and words. Outside, the snow glints under a pale sun. You step back onto the frozen path, carrying not only supplies but a reinforced sense of shared endurance. The trail feels less lonely now, marked by connection. When you return to your own lodge, the familiar curve of its walls greets you. Smoke rises steadily from the roof opening. Inside, warmth awaits. You place the traded items near the storage area, aware that these goods extend the margin of safety for the nights ahead. Winter remains formidable, but it is faced collectively across distances. As evening approaches again, you reflect on how survival here is layered. Shelter, clothing, food, knowledge, and beyond all of these, relationship. The freezing night will press against many walls across the landscape. Yet in lodge after lodge, fires will glow embers tended by hands connected through exchange. You settle once more near your hearth, listening to the wind gather outside, knowing that beyond this dwelling, others are listening too, bound by shared understanding of what winter demands and how it can be met together. As the season deepens, you begin to notice a quiet question beneath daily routines. Stay or move, remain anchored in this winter shelter, or follow a path carved by instinct and experience? The answer is not universal. It shifts with geography, resources, and tradition. You stand at the edge of the settlement and look out across the frozen land. Snow lies thick across the plains, yet in the distance you can see a darker line where herds might travel. For some communities, winter meant settling firmly into earth lodges or reinforced camps. For others, mobility remained essential even in cold months. A widely accepted historical understanding reveals that many plains groups maintained seasonal movement patterns, adjusting their camps to follow bison herds or access reliable food sources. The cold did not automatically freeze life in place. Instead, it required calculated decisions about when to relocate and when to conserve energy. You imagine packing a teepee in winter. The process is slower, more deliberate. Poles must be freed from frozen ground, hides stiffened by cold need careful handling. Yet the design itself allows for dismantling and transport. Mobility is built into the architecture. In contrast, earth lodges represent commitment to place. Thick walls of soil and timber cannot be lifted easily. Communities that invested in such structures often balanced agriculture, hunting, and storage in ways that supported winter settlement. Researchers have long examined how these contrasting approaches reflected environmental realities rather than rigid cultural divisions. In open grasslands where herds migrated, following them could mean survival. In regions with stored crops and stable resources, remaining in fortified lodges made sense. You picture yourself in a mobile camp, the snow crunching beneath sleds or travois, pulled by dogs or horses in later periods. The air is sharp, but the movement generates warmth. Each step forward keeps blood circulating. The landscape unfolds, gradually revealing familiar landmarks even beneath its white covering. A small but fascinating detail recorded in some accounts describes how snow cover could actually ease transport in certain circumstances. Sleds glide more smoothly over packed snow than wagons do over muddy ground. Winter travel, though cold, might be less physically jarring than spring journeys through thawing earth. Historians continue to explore how the adoption of the horse in various regions transformed winter mobility. Travel distances expanded. Hunting efficiency shifted. Yet even before horses became widespread, carefully managed foot travel, and dog assistance enabled seasonal relocation, you consider the emotional aspect of movement. Leaving a sheltered lodge in midwinter carries risk. Yet remaining too long in one place when resources dwindle poses its own danger. Judgment becomes paramount. Back in the settlement, elders discuss conditions quietly. Tracks of game, thickness of ice along rivers, depth of snow in low valleys. Decisions are rarely impulsive. They are grounded in observation and memory. A respected scholarly interpretation suggests that flexibility defined successful winter strategies. Communities that adapted movement patterns according to the changing climate and resource availability tended to endure harsh seasons more reliably. You walk through the camp once more, noticing how tools are arranged in ways that allow for swift packing if needed. Nothing is excessively burdensome. Efficiency shapes daily life. At the same time, there is comfort in rootedness. Earth lodges once warmed offer remarkable stability against prolonged cold. The idea of abandoning such a space is not taken lightly. Some debates among historians center on how climate fluctuations influence shifts between mobility and settlement over centuries. Periods of harsher winters may have encouraged different patterns than milder eras. The evidence is complex and varies by region. You crouch near the entrance of a lodge and feel the steady warmth radiating outward. The ground beneath holds heat. The walls shield against wind. Staying feels safe. Yet you also recall the distant line of dark shapes on the horizon. Movement offers access to fresh game new wood supplies, perhaps safer ground if snow accumulates too heavily. The freezing night does not dictate a single response, it invites assessment. As evening approaches, you sense that for now, the decision is to remain. Stores are sufficient, shelter is secure. The herds are not yet distant enough to justify relocation. You settle near the hearth, once more aware that winter survival is not static, it is dynamic, shaped by constant evaluation. The wind rises outside, brushing snow across the surface in delicate waves. Whether rooted in earth or poised for travel, the community faces the same cold sky. You realize that resilience lies not in choosing movement or stillness permanently, but in knowing when to embrace each. As embers glow and breath warms the air once more, you feel the quiet confidence that comes from adaptability. Winter may test walls and stamina, but it also rewards those who listen carefully to the land before deciding their next step. As darkness gathers once more, your attention returns to something so ordinary you might almost overlook it. Air. Not the freezing gusts outside, but the invisible currents within the shelter itself. You settle near the hearth and watch the faint ribbon of smoke rise, curious about how warmth and breath coexist in such an enclosed space. It would be easy to imagine these dwellings as smoky and suffocating, yet extensive historical research shows that ventilation was carefully managed in many native winter homes. The adjustable smoke flaps at the top of a teepee were not decorative details. They could be angled precisely according to wind direction, creating a draft that pulled smoke upward and away from those resting below. You tilt your head and study the opening above. The flaps shift slightly, with the breeze guided by cords anchored outside. Earlier in the day, someone adjusted them after noticing a change in wind. That small correction now keeps the interior clear. In an earth lodge, ventilation functions differently, but with equal intention. The central smoke hole allows heat to rise and exit gradually while the thick walls reduce uncontrolled drafts. The result is a stable balance between warmth and breathable air. Environmental historians have observed that understanding airflow was as crucial as understanding insulation. Too much sealing would trap smoke and moisture, leading to discomfort or illness. Too much openness would bleed warmth into the night. You inhale slowly and notice the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with earth and hide. It is present but not overwhelming. The air feels alive, moving gently rather than stagnating. A small but intriguing note from certain ethnographic records mentions that some families deliberately positioned their sleeping areas based on prevailing wind patterns. If smoke drifted slightly to one side, bedding might be arranged accordingly. Comfort was not left to chance. The concept of cross-ventilation, often discussed in modern architecture, was intuitively applied here long before it acquired a technical name. By aligning entrance openings and smoke vents, thoughtfully dwellings encouraged controlled airflow. Warm air rose and exited. Cooler air entered subtly from lower gaps, feeding the fire without chilling the occupants. Some scholars continue to explore how variations in ventilation strategies reflected regional climate differences. In areas with extremely harsh winds, openings were minimized and carefully shielded. In milder cold zones, greater airflow might be tolerated to prevent dampness. You watch as someone near the entrance adjusts a hide curtain, slightly narrowing a gap where a faint draft had begun to form. The motion is quick, almost unconscious. Years of observation have trained these hands. Condensation can be an unseen adversary in winter. When warm breath meets cold surfaces, moisture forms. If left unchecked, dampness can sap warmth quickly. You notice how the steady upward pull of air reduces the accumulation of frost along interior walls. The system breathes just enough to prevent that chilling buildup. A respected academic interpretation suggests that such architectural sensitivity reveals a sophisticated grasp of environmental physics developed through lived experience rather than formal theory. You feel that truth in the comfort of your lungs as you breathe easily beside the fire. The embers glow brighter for a moment as a small log is added. The flame leans slightly, responding to the subtle draft from above. It is almost as though the fire and the smoke hole converse silently, each shaping the other. There are ongoing debates among researchers about whether certain smoke flap configurations were standardized across regions or varied significantly from family to family. The surviving evidence suggests both shared principles and local improvisation. You glance upward once more and imagine the scene from outside, snow resting gently around the base, smoke drifting into the dark sky in a thin, controlled stream. The dwelling appears calm, almost modest, yet within it a complex dance of air unfolds. You shift your position slightly and notice that the warmest air gathers higher up near the ceiling. Those seated upright feel more heat than those lying flat. Yet the thick bedding below compensates for that gradient. Even your own breath contributes to the system. Warm air rising from bodies joins the upward flow, maintaining circulation. The wind outside increases, briefly pressing against the structure. The smoke flaps respond, tilting slightly as cords tighten. Inside, the air remains steady. You realize that surviving freezing nights without modern homes depends on attention to what cannot be seen. Airflow is invisible yet essential. It must be guided, not ignored. As the lodge settles into nighttime quiet, the ventilation continues its gentle work. Smoke rises, warmth circulates, moisture escapes. You lie back and draw your robe higher, feeling confident that the air around you will remain breathable and balanced until dawn. Beyond the walls, winter continues its relentless sweep across the land. Within, air and fire collaborate in a quiet partnership, ensuring that warmth does not suffocate and breath does not freeze. And as your eyelids grow heavy once more, you sense that even something as intangible as moving air has been mastered through patience, observation, and deep respect for the rhythms of cold. By the time another pale morning light filters through the smoke hole, you have begun to understand that winter survival is not sustained by shelter and food alone. It also depends on tools shaped specifically for frozen ground and stiffened hands. You step outside and feel the familiar bite of cold on your cheeks. Snow has hardened overnight into a crust that glints under early light. Someone nearby is already at work, kneeling beside a wooden frame partially buried beneath drifted powder. In many native communities, winter tools were adapted carefully to seasonal demands. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence confirms that snowshoes were widely used across northern and woodland regions. Their wide frames distributed weight across soft snow, preventing the wearer from sinking deeply with each step. You watch as someone straps on a pair. The woven lattice of rawhide stretches tightly across a wooden frame, often shaped in distinctive regional patterns. The design is not decorative whim, it reflects terrain. Longer, narrower snowshoes suited open forests, while shorter rounded forms maneuvered better through dense brush. You attempt to step without them and immediately feel your foot plunge downward. The contrast is humbling. With snowshoes secured, movement becomes almost graceful gliding rather than stumbling. There are also specialized as tools for cutting frozen wood. Axes and adzes are kept sharp, their edges maintained carefully despite the cold that can make metal brittle. Before, widespread metal trade stone blades served similar purposes, hafted securely to wooden handles. An established historical perspective emphasizes that winter hunting required modifications in equipment as well. Bows were kept close to body warmth to prevent weakening of sinew strings. Spears and traps were adapted to function in icy conditions. A small but fascinating detail preserved in some northern traditions describes hunters breathing gently on bowstrings to keep them flexible before use. Even the moisture of breath had a role to play in preventing snapping fibers. You follow a hunter moving steadily across the snowshoes, whispering softly against the crust. The cold air sharpens scent and sound. Tracks are easier to read against white ground. A faint line of impressions leads toward a stand of trees. Tools for tracking become mental as much as physical. A bent twig, a slight depression, a scattering of disturbed snow crystals all carry information. Winter simplifies the landscape, in some ways stripping it of foliage and revealing movement more clearly. Scholars continue to examine how tool innovation evolved in response to seasonal pressures. In colder climates, sleds pulled by dogs or later by horses transformed the ability to transport wood and food. Even simple wooden toboggans could glide efficiently over packed snow, reducing strain. You glance back toward the settlement and see someone repairing a snowshoe by the fire. Rawhide lacing is tightened carefully, ensuring no slack remains. A broken strap in deep snow could mean more than inconvenience. Within the lodge, tools are arranged with care. They are not tossed aside. Winter magnifies the cost of negligence. A dull blade slows wood gathering. A cracked frame hinders mobility. A generally accepted scholarly view holds that technological adaptability was as central to winter endurance as social cohesion. Tools extended the body's capacity, bridging the gap between human vulnerability and environmental severity. You return inside, briefly warming your hands near the embers. A scraping tool rests nearby, used to clean hides or shape wood. Its handle fits comfortably into your palm, worn smooth by repeated use. There is quiet pride in craftsmanship here. Each tool reflects knowledge accumulated across generations. Designs are refined subtly over time, responding to new conditions without abandoning proven forms. Some historians have debated how quickly innovation spread between neighbouring groups, particularly in regions where trade networks flourished. Evidence suggests a blend of shared ideas and local experimentation. You step outside once more and test the snowshoes yourself. With each measured stride, you feel less resistance. Movement becomes sustainable. The freezing night may dominate the hours of darkness, but the daylight hours demand preparation for the next one. Wood must be cut, food retrieved, pathways maintained. Without proper tools, even the warmest lodge would become a fragile refuge cut off from resources beyond its walls. As the sun climbs higher, though, offering little heat, you sense the steady rhythm of labour continuing. Each sharpened blade, each repaired strap, each woven lattice contributes to another safe evening by the fire. When you finally return inside as twilight approaches, snow clinging to your leggings, you understand that winter survival is active. It is built with hands and maintained through effort. You place the snowshoes carefully near the entrance and brush frost from your sleeves. The fire glows patiently at the centre of the lodge, awaiting the long stretch of darkness once more. And as the cold gathers outside, you feel ready equipped, not only with shelter and food, but with tools shaped precisely for this season of ice and endurance. As evening settles once more, there is a subtle shift in the atmosphere inside the lodge. The tasks of the day, wind-down tools are set aside and the fire is coaxed into a steady glow. Yet tonight feels slightly different, not urgent, not anxious, but purposeful in another way. You notice that a small space near the hearth has been cleared. A few objects are placed carefully on the ground. Perhaps a carved item, perhaps a small pouch, perhaps something simple that carries meaning beyond its shape. Across many native communities, winter was not only a season of physical endurance, but also a time of spiritual reflection and ceremony. A widely recognized historical reality affirms that cold months often created opportunities for rituals that might not occur during busier seasons of travel and harvest. You settle quietly, sensing that this moment requires attention rather than conversation. The firelight flickers against faces that now appear thoughtful inward. An elder begins to speak softly. The words are measured, not dramatic. You may not understand every phrase, but you recognize reverence in the tone. Winter is acknowledged not as an enemy, but as a presence with power. Ethnographic studies have documented winter ceremonies across various regions, some honouring animal spirits, others marking the turning of seasons, still others focusing on healing and communal balance. These practices differed widely by culture, yet they shared a common thread. Cold was not merely endured, it was respected. You watch as a small offering is placed near the fire. Perhaps it is a pinch of tobacco, perhaps a fragment of food returned symbolically to the earth. The gesture is quiet but intentional. There is an idea preserved in certain traditions that winter strips away distraction. The land grows silent. Movement slows. In that stillness, spiritual awareness sharpens. You feel that clarity now as the lodge holds its breath. A lesser-known detail recorded in some community histories suggests that winter dances were sometimes performed within enclosed spaces adapted to limited room yet full of meaning. Movement generated warmth as well as expression. The rhythm of feet against packed earth carried both heat and memory. Researchers continue to explore how ceremonial life during winter reinforced psychological resilience. Ritual provides structure when days grow short and nights stretch long. It anchors the community within a larger framework of meaning. You glance toward the smoke hole and see a faint ribbon of smoke rising into the dark sky. It feels symbolic, a thread connecting earth and air. The elder's voice lowers further, speaking of ancestors who endured winters before this one. Their survival becomes part of the present moment. The cold outside is no longer isolated in time. It is part of a long continuum. Some scholars have debated how spiritual interpretations of winter influenced practical decisions. Did reverence for certain animals affect hunting timing? Did ceremonial calendars shape seasonal movement? The interplay between belief and behavior is complex and varies across regions. You notice that even children sit more quietly than usual, sensing the gravity of the occasion. They may not grasp every layer of meaning, but they absorb the atmosphere. The fire crackles gently, illuminating carved patterns on wooden beams or subtle designs painted along interior walls. These marks too carry stories. You reflect on how modern life often separates spirituality from daily survival. Here the two are intertwined. Lighting a fire, storing food, adjusting a smoke flap all exist within a worldview that acknowledges unseen forces. The ceremony does not last long in clock time, yet it feels expansive. When the final words are spoken, there is no applause, only a shared exhale. Warmth from the fire seems deeper somehow, as though reinforced by intention. The cold beyond the walls remains unchanged, but your perception of it has shifted. An established academic viewpoint suggests that spiritual frameworks in harsh climates often fostered gratitude and humility toward environmental forces. Rather than framing winter solely as an adversary, communities integrated it into their cosmology. You feel that integration now. The wind brushes faintly against the lodge, but it no longer sounds hostile. It sounds like part of the larger rhythm acknowledged in the ceremony. As people settle back into their usual places, conversation resumes softly. The objects placed near the hearth remain for a while, then are gathered carefully. You draw your robe closer and lean back against the curved wall. The freezing night stretches wide, outside stars sharp above snow-covered ground. Inside warmth persists, sustained not only by fire and fur and earth, but by shared meaning. You close your eyes, briefly aware that winter survival encompasses more than technique. It includes reverence, memory, and the quiet confidence that comes from understanding your place within the turning of seasons. The embers glow steadily, reflecting in thoughtful eyes before they too grow heavy with sleep. Some nights, even with thick walls and steady embers, you notice a different kind of tension in the air. Not from wind, not from hunger, from the quiet, uneven rhythm of someone's breathing nearby. Illness in winter carries a particular weight. The cold itself does not always cause sickness, but it can magnify weakness. You shift slightly and glance toward a child resting close to the warmest part of the lodge. Their cheeks are flushed deeper than usual. A soft cough escapes their lips. You feel a subtle tightening in your chest. Across many indigenous communities, care during illness relied on a combination of practical knowledge, herbal remedies, and communal support. A well-established historical understanding confirms that before modern medicine, families turned to plant-based treatments, steam warmth, and attentive nursing to ease symptoms. You watch as an adult kneels beside the child, placing a steady hand on their forehead. The gesture is gentle but purposeful. Temperature is assessed not with instruments but with touch. A small bundle is retrieved from a pouch near the wall. Inside are dried leaves and roots gathered months earlier. The preparation of winter medicine required foresight equal to food storage. Certain herbs were collected during specific seasons, dried carefully and preserved for moments like this. The fire is coaxed brighter and a small pot of water is set above it. The herbs are added slowly, releasing a faint earthy scent as steam rises. The lodge fills with a different fragrance, now sharp and soothing at once. Ethnobotanical research has documented a wide range of medicinal plants used by native communities, from willow bark for pain relief to various roots and leaves for respiratory ailments. The specific remedies varied by region and ecosystem, yet the underlying principle remained constant. The land provided not only shelter and food, but medicine. You sit quietly as the steam begins to curl around the child's face. An adult drapes a hide loosely over them, creating a small tent to concentrate warmth and vapor. The child breathes more steadily after a few moments. There is no frantic energy, instead there is focus. An intriguing detail preserved in some oral histories recounts how certain healers listened carefully to the quality of a cough, distinguishing between dryness and congestion, tailoring treatments accordingly. Sound once again becomes diagnostic. Researchers continue to examine how communal living both aided and complicated winter health. Close quarters increased the risk of spreading infections, yet they also ensured that no one suffered alone. Constant proximity allowed early detection of symptoms and immediate care. You notice how bedding is rearranged subtly to keep the child closest to the fire without overheating them. Balance returns as a theme once more. Some historians have explored how ceremonial practices intertwined with healing, suggesting that spiritual support often accompanied physical remedies. In certain communities, songs or quiet prayers were offered, alongside herbal preparations reinforcing hope. You hear a soft melody now barely louder than the crackle of embers. It is not dramatic, it is steady. The rhythm seems to calm both child and adults. The freezing night presses against the walls, indifferent to human vulnerability. Yet inside, warmth and attention gather around the small figure resting near the hearth. You think about how modern medicine often isolates illness in separate rooms, sterile and controlled. Here, healing occurs within the shared heart of the home. Others continue to rest nearby, their presence offering comfort. A respected academic interpretation emphasizes that resilience in pre-industrial societies depended not only on physical adaptation but on social cohesion during crisis. Illness tested that cohesion. The steam slowly dissipates. The child's breathing steadies further. A cup of warmed herbal infusion is held carefully to their lips once it cools slightly. Outside, the wind rises, briefly rattling the outer covering. Inside, hands remain steady. You realize that surviving freezing nights without modern homes required not only architectural ingenuity and stored provisions, but also an intimate relationship with the medicinal landscape. Every plant gathered months ago now proves its worth. Every lesson passed from elder to younger hands finds purpose. Gradually, the child's flushed cheeks soften. The cough quiets to a faint murmur. The fire is banked carefully once more, ensuring warmth through the remaining hours of darkness. You lie back down, listening, closely aware that winter challenges the body as much as the walls around it. Yet within this circle of shared breath and herbal steam, you sense that care itself becomes another form of insulation, shielding the vulnerable against the cold's quiet persistence. And as sleep slowly returns to the lodge, you understand that endurance in winter depends as much on compassion as on any physical barrier. The night has grown deep again, and the fire rests in a low amber glow. Most of the lodge breathes in steady rhythm, wrapped in layers of hide and warmth. Yet you sense that not everyone is fully surrendered to sleep. Near the entrance, an adult remains slightly upright, eyes half open, listening. In many indigenous winter encampments, quiet vigilance formed part of nightly routine. Historical accounts and oral traditions indicate that families often practiced subtle forms of night watch, especially when food stores were nearby or when tensions with neighbouring groups existed. The watch was rarely announced with ceremony. It unfolded as a shared responsibility. You shift gently and notice how the person nearest the doorway seems attuned to every sound. Their posture is relaxed but alert. This is not fear, it is awareness shaped by experience. Outside, the snow reflects faint moonlight. The landscape appears still, almost frozen in time. Yet winter nights are not empty. Animals roam in search of food. Ice cracks along distant waterways. Wind shifts direction without warning. A commonly acknowledged historical insight suggests that winter camps were often arranged with strategic considerations in mind. Entrances might face away from prevailing winds. Lodges could be positioned to allow clear lines of sight toward open terrain. Such decisions reduced vulnerability long before darkness fell. You hear a faint rustle beyond the wall. The watcher does not react immediately. Instead, they tilt their heads slightly, listening for pattern. The sound repeats once, then fades. Ethnographers have noted that interpreting night sounds require deep familiarity with seasonal behaviour. The shuffle of a deer differs from the heavier tread of a larger predator. The rhythm of wind against bark does not match the deliberate crunch of footsteps. There are ongoing discussions among scholars about how frequently winter encampments faced external threats compared to other seasons. Some argue that deep cold reduced conflict by limiting travel. Others point to evidence that scarcity could heighten tension. The reality likely varied by region and era. You draw your robe closer and feel reassured by the presence near the entrance. The role rotates. No one bears the burden alone every night. A small but compelling detail preserved in certain community narratives describes how subtle signals were used to communicate concern without waking everyone. A quiet tap on a wooden beam, a low whistle mimicking wind. These understated cues allowed readiness without panic. The fire shifts softly as a log settles inward. The watcher glances toward it briefly, ensuring no spark threatens the bedding. Researchers studying communal safety often emphasize that distributed vigilance strengthens resilience. When responsibility is shared, exhaustion is reduced and awareness remains sharper. You imagine the watcher earlier in the evening choosing a place closer to the entrance. It may have been decided quietly, perhaps even unconsciously, based on who felt most rested. Outside, the wind swells, brushing snow against the walls in a gentle cascade. The sound is steady, familiar. The watcher relaxes slightly. The freezing night presses outward endlessly, yet inside human presence holds firm. A respected academic viewpoint highlights that security in pre-modern communities relied more on cooperation and attentiveness than on physical barriers alone. Thick walls offer protection, but awareness completes it. You sense that this quiet watchfulness extends beyond physical threat. It also guards against fire spreading, against smoke building too heavily, against embers fading too low. Time moves slowly. The moon shifts imperceptibly across the sky. Eventually the watcher adjusts positions, stretching slightly. Another person near the wall opens their eyes briefly as if confirming all remains calm. Without words, the transition occurs. The second person settles nearer the entrance while the first eases back into full rest. This exchange is seamless. No formal announcement marks the change. You realize that surviving freezing nights without modern homes required not only insulation and food and tools, but also sustained alertness, woven gently into rest. The cold outside is impartial. It does not negotiate. Yet within this lodge, layered warmth is paired with layered awareness. You close your eyes once more, trusting that someone listens while you sleep, just as you might listen on another night. The embers glow softly, casting faint light across faces at peace. By now, winter feels almost familiar to. By now, winter feels almost familiar to you. The cold still bites when you step outside, but it no longer surprises. You begin to notice how the rhythm of survival is shaped not only by materials and tools, but by the careful distribution of labor within the community. Morning light filters in softly and already movement begins. Someone tends the fire, someone checks stored food, someone steps out to assess snow depth and wind direction. These roles are not chaotic, they follow patterns that have formed over generations. A well-supported historical record shows that in many Native American societies, labor during winter was divided according to skill age and social role rather than rigid hierarchy alone. Tasks were allocated in ways that maximized efficiency and safety. You watch as one adult moves outside with snowshoes to inspect nearby traps, while another remains inside reinforcing a seam where cold air had slipped through during the night. The work feels balanced rather than burdensome. In some plains communities, men often undertook longer hunting excursions, particularly when following herds across frozen terrain. Women frequently managed food preparation, clothing maintenance, and the interior warmth of the dwelling. Yet this was not universal, and roles could shift depending on circumstance. Anthropologists have emphasized that flexibility was often more important than strict division. If illness struck or resources required urgent attention, responsibilities adjusted. Survival demanded cooperation over pride. You notice how an elder instructs a younger person in repairing a snowshoe binding. The lesson is patient. The younger hands fumble slightly, then improve. Skill is transferred quietly, ensuring continuity. A fascinating observation recorded in certain regional studies notes that winter sometimes allowed for intensified craft production. With travel reduced and nights-long, individuals might focus on tool refinement, beadwork, or garment construction. Productivity did not cease with cold, it changed form. You sit near the hearth and watch someone carefully stitch fur lining into a garment. Each stitch strengthens protection for the next freezing night. This work may not involve venturing into snow, yet it is equally essential. Scholars continue to discuss how perceptions of gender roles in indigenous societies have often been oversimplified by outside observers. Evidence suggests nuanced systems in which authority and responsibility were distributed in complex ways. Winter survival depended on recognizing the value of each contribution. You step outside briefly and see a group working together to gather wood from a stand of trees shielded from the harshest wind. No one lingers unnecessarily. Hands move quickly, efficiently. Inside, food is portioned carefully. Children are guided gently toward tasks appropriate to their ability. Even small hands can carry kindling or assist in organizing bedding. The freezing night ahead influences every decision. Wood gathered now ensures warmth later. Garments mended today prevent frostbite tomorrow. A respected academic perspective underscores that communal resilience often arises from shared purpose. When each person understands their role within the larger system, effort becomes coordinated rather than fragmented. You reflect on how modern life sometimes isolates tasks, separating work from home, skill from necessity. Here, the link is immediate. The robe being sewn may wrap a sleeping child within hours. The wood being cut will glow at your feet tonight. There are still debates among historians about the extent to which winter intensified or relaxed certain labour patterns. Some argue that colder months provided relative respite from agricultural demands in certain regions. Others suggest that maintaining warmth and supplies required continuous exertion. The truth likely varied widely. As afternoon light fades, everyone returns gradually to the shelter. Snow is brushed from leggings. Tools are set carefully in their places. The fire is rekindled with fresh wood. The pot simmers, once more steam rising gently into the controlled draft above. You notice how no single task seems heroic. There is no dramatic conquest of winter. Instead, survival unfolds through accumulated small acts. An adult checks the smoke flap one last time before darkness settles fully. Another shakes out bedding to ensure no frost has crept into layers. You feel a quiet admiration for this system. Each role supports another. The hunter relies on the one who prepares hides. The seamstress relies on the one who gathers wood. The watcher at night depends on the one who rests fully beforehand. When the freezing darkness returns, it finds a community already aligned in purpose. You settle once more near the hearth, aware that survival here is not a solitary achievement. It is a shared composition, each person contributing a note to the steady melody of endurance. The wind brushes the outer walls again, but inside coordinated effort has already prepared the response. You close your eyes briefly, knowing that when morning comes, the rhythm will continue, each hand finding its place in the ongoing work of winter. As the season stretches onward, you begin to sense how much of winter survival rests not only in strong hands and steady tools, but in memory. The kind that does not fade when snow falls. The kind carried in voices that have witnessed many winters before this one. You sit near the fire while an elder leans slightly forward, palms extended towards the warmth. The lines on their face are etched by time and weather. You realize that they have seen more winters than anyone else in this lodge. That experience is not abstract, it is practical. A widely recognized historical insight affirms that elders in many Native American communities served as living archives of environmental knowledge. They remembered which valley flooded during thaw, which slopes held snow longest, which years brought bitter cold beyond expectation. You listen as the elder speaks quietly about a winter long ago when snow piled higher than the doorway. The tone is not dramatic, it is reflective. There is a lesson embedded in the recollection. Perhaps they recall how food stores had to be rationed more carefully that year, or how wind shifted unpredictably, forcing adjustments to shelter orientation. The details feel vivid even though you are not there. Ethnographers have frequently noted that oral histories preserved climatic memory across generations. Stories of unusually harsh winters or unexpected thaws guided future decisions. Experience became instruction. You notice how younger adults lean in slightly, absorbing each word. The information is not written down. It is carried through attentive listening. A small but compelling detail found in certain regional accounts describes elders advising on subtle signs in the sky that indicated approaching storms, the shape of clouds at dusk, the behavior of birds just before snowfall. These observations were honed over decades. Researchers continue to explore how traditional ecological knowledge provided adaptive advantage in unpredictable climates. Long before modern meteorology communities relied on accumulated pattern recognition, you step outside briefly and glance at the horizon. The elder had mentioned a faint halo around the moon the previous night suggesting incoming weather. You look for it now, trying to see what they saw. Back inside, the elder gestures toward the smoke hole, explaining how wind once shifted suddenly and forced a rapid adjustment to prevent smoke from filling the lodge. The memory is specific, tactile. There is also reassurance in these stories. When an elder recounts surviving a winter more severe than this one, it tempers fear. The present cold feels less absolute when framed within a longer arc. Some historians have debated how accurately oral traditions preserved climatic events over long periods. While precise dates may blur, the functional knowledge embedded within narratives often prove remarkably consistent. You sit closer to the fire and feel the steady heat on your hands. The elder's voice blends with the crackle of embers. Children nearby listen with wide eyes. They may not yet grasp the full weight of these recollections, but they absorb tone and emphasis. They learn that winter is not new. It has come before and will come again. A respected academic viewpoint emphasizes that resilience is strengthened when communities maintain intergenerational continuity. Elders anchor collective memory, preventing each winter from feeling unprecedented. You realize that without such memory, fear could grow easily. Every cold night might seem like a unique threat. But with stories stretching backward through time, winter becomes cyclical rather than catastrophic. The elder pauses, then offers a quiet piece of advice about conserving wood during late-season storms. The instruction feels simple, yet it carries the authority of experience tested repeatedly. Outside, the wind stirs, faintly brushing snow across the surface of the land. Inside, knowledge flows from one generation to the next. You reflect on how modern societies often separate older people from daily survival tasks. Here their presence is integral. They may not venture into deep snow as often, but their insight guides those who do. The fire settles into a soft glow as evening deepens. The elder leans back, slightly satisfied that the lesson has been shared. You close your eyes for a moment, holding on to the realization that surviving freezing nights without modern homes depended not only on physical materials but on memory carried in human voices. The cold outside remains steady, yet it feels less intimidating when placed within the long chain of winters already endured. As the lodge grows quiet once more, you sense that you are not merely resting within a shelter of earth and hide, you are resting within a shelter of accumulated wisdom. And when the next storm approaches, you know that it will be met not with panic but with the calm recognition of those who have seen its kind before. As another pale afternoon fades into silver dusk, you notice movement at the edge of the settlement that does not belong solely to human footsteps. A pair of dogs trot lightly across the snow, their breath puffing in steady clouds. Their presence feels woven into the rhythm of winter life. You crouch and extend a hand as one approaches, thick fur brushing against your fingers. The coat is dense, built for cold. The animal's body radiates warmth even through your glove. A broadly documented historical reality confirms that dogs played a significant role in many native communities across North America, especially in colder regions. Long before horses became widespread on the plains, dogs assisted with transport, hauling goods on travois and helping move supplies between camps. You watch as one dog settles near the outer edge of the lodge entrance, curling into itself with tail wrapped neatly over its nose. The position is efficient, minimizing heat loss. The animal seems instinctively aware of how to conserve warmth. There are accounts preserved in various regional histories describing how dogs were sometimes allowed to sleep close to dwelling entrances during severe cold, not only for companionship but also as an additional buffer against drafts. Their bodies created a subtle barrier where icy air might otherwise slip inward. You feel a faint sense of comfort in their presence. Beyond practical help, they offer alertness. A sudden bark in the night can signal approaching animals or unfamiliar movement long before human ears detect it. Ethnographers have observed that in northern communities, sled dogs became essential for winter travel across snow-covered terrain. Though this varied widely by geography, the partnership between humans and dogs deepened survival capacity in frozen landscapes. You imagine traveling across hard-packed snow with a sled gliding behind a small team. The dog's strength transforms distance into something manageable. Their paws adapted to cold surfaces grip where human feet might falter. Inside the lodge, a child reaches toward a resting dog, fingers tangling gently in thick fur. The animal does not flinch. Warmth is shared without ceremony. Some researchers continue to examine how early domesticated dogs in the Americas adapted to diverse climates alongside human communities. Evidence suggests selective breeding for traits suited to specific environments long before modern classification. A small but intriguing detail found in certain oral traditions recounts how dogs were sometimes credited with sensing storms before humans could see them. Restlessness, subtle shifts in behavior, or low whines served as early warnings. You step outside briefly and notice tracks in the snow not far from camp. The dogs sniff the air alert but not alarmed. Their awareness extends beyond sight into scent carried faintly on freezing wind. The freezing night will return soon, and you recognize that these animals add another layer of security. Their hearing is sharp, their reactions quick. A respected academic interpretation emphasizes that cooperation between humans and domesticated animals expanded ecological range. With canine assistance, winter tasks like hauling wood or tracking game became more efficient. You return inside and settle near the hearth. One dog curls closer to the entrance, another rests along the interior wall, fur catching the glow of firelight. There is also companionship in their quiet presence. In long winters, when darkness lingers, the simple weight of a warm animal nearby eases solitude. Historians still discuss how central dogs were to winter survival across different regions, noting considerable variation. In some areas, they were indispensable transport partners. In others, they served primarily as guards and companions. You watch as an elder absent-mindedly reaches down to scratch behind a dog's ear. The gesture feels natural, affectionate. Outside, the snow reflects a faint shimmer of moonlight. The wind hums softly across open ground. Inside, warmth gathers not only from fire and bodies but from the steady presence of animals who have shared this landscape for generations. You realize that surviving freezing nights without modern homes depended on more than architecture and tools. It included partnership with other living beings whose instincts complemented human skill. As the embers glow low and breathing slows around you, the dogs remain alert in their quiet way, ears twitching occasionally at distant sounds. You draw your robe closer and let your hand rest lightly against warm fur beside you. The cold beyond the walls remains vast and unfeeling. Yet within this circle of shared warmth, human and animal alike find shelter in each other's presence. You wake before sunrise to a different kind of silence. not the muffled hush of snow alone, but a deeper stillness that seems to press against the lodge from one direction. When you step outside, you understand why. The river nearby has frozen more completely overnight. What was once a moving ribbon of dark water now lies pale and solid, its surface locked beneath a crust of ice. Steam no longer rises from it. Instead, the frozen expanse reflects the early light in faint shades of blue. A well-established historical understanding confirms that frozen waterways profoundly shaped winter settlement patterns for many native communities. Rivers were lifelines in warmer months, providing fish transport and fertile soil. In winter, they transformed into both barriers and bridges. You walk carefully toward the bank, testing each step. The ice groans faintly somewhere in the distance, a low echo that travels far in the cold air. It is a reminder that even frozen water is alive beneath its rigid surface. In certain regions, winter travel across ice offered efficiency. A frozen river could serve as a straight path through terrain that was otherwise tangled with brush or uneven ground. Archaeological evidence indicates that some communities planned winter routes along waterways precisely for this reason. You crouch near the edge and notice where a small opening has been maintained. A hole cut through the ice reveals dark water below. Fish may still move beneath that frozen lid. In northern areas, especially ice fishing provided a steady food source during deep winter. Ethnographic studies have documented how specialized tools were used to cut and maintain such openings. Bone or later metal implements chipped carefully through thick ice. Patience was required. A misjudged blow could crack beyond intention. A lesser-known observation from certain accounts describes how children were sometimes taught to listen for the subtle difference between solid ice and thinner patches by tapping lightly and hearing the response. A hollow echo signaled caution. Sound once again becomes a guide. You glance across the frozen surface and imagine how it might influence safety as well. An icy river can deter some predators or rival groups from easy approach, yet it can also grant access if thick enough to support weight. Scholars continue to explore how fluctuating winter temperatures complicated this relationship. Periods of sudden thaw could weaken ice unpredictably, posing danger to those who relied on its solidity. You step onto a carefully tested portion, feeling the firmness beneath your boots. The sensation is strange standing above flowing water you cannot see. Back near the lodge, someone gathers chunks of ice to bring inside. Melted carefully, they provide fresh drinking water without the need to break through snow for every pot. Snow can be melted as well, but it requires more volume and more fuel. There is also insulation value in proximity to frozen water. Some winter camps were established near rivers, not only for access but for microclimatic reasons. Valleys could offer slight wind protection compared to open plains. A respected academic perspective emphasizes that indigenous communities understood waterways as dynamic systems adjusting settlement and travel strategies according to seasonal shifts. You think about the river in warmer months alive with movement and sound. Now it lies subdued, yet not inert. Some historians debate the extent to which winter river crossings influenced intertribal contact patterns, suggesting that frozen channels may have facilitated encounters that were less feasible during flood season. The evidence varies by the region, but the possibility lingers. You walk back towards the lodge as the sky brightens gradually. Smoke rises in a thin line from the roof opening, drifting across the pale expanse of ice. The freezing night has passed once more, but winter remains deeply present in the transformed landscape. Inside, warmth greets you again. A pot begins to simmer as someone melts a block of river ice into usable water. You sit near the hearth and reflect on how even something as fluid as water becomes part of the winter strategy. Frozen rivers shape movement, provide sustenance and influence where homes are built. Surviving freezing nights without modern homes requires constant negotiation with the elements. Water solidifies, snow accumulates, wind shifts. Each transformation invites response rather than resistance. As daylight settles softly over the frozen river, you feel an expanded understanding of winter's complexity. The lodge stands steady nearby, its walls reinforced by snow and earth. Beyond it, the river waits patiently beneath its icy surface, ready to thaw again when seasons turn. For now, both shelter and ice serve their purpose, holding life steady in the quiet, unyielding heart of winter. As winter settles more firmly across the continent, you begin to understand that there is no single winter story. The cold you feel here near this frozen river and earth lodge is not identical to the cold felt in distant forests or far northern tundra. Survival shifts shape depending on geography. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing much farther north where snow lies deeper and temperatures plunge even lower. In Arctic regions, indigenous communities developed snow houses shaped from carefully cut blocks fitted together in spirals that formed domed shelters. Contrary to popular misconception, these structures were not crude emergency huts. Historical and archaeological research confirms that when built correctly, snow houses trapped heat efficiently warmed by body warmth and small lamps fueled by animal fat. You picture yourself stepping inside such a space. The air feels surprisingly mild compared to the biting wind outside. The interior glows softly from a stone lamp, its flame steady and controlled. Snow once feared becomes architecture, travels south in your mind toward the Great Plains. Their mobile tipias allow families to follow migrating bison herds even during colder months. The design remains flexible, capable of being dismantled and moved as needed. Winter camps might cluster in sheltered river valleys where trees offer firewood and windbreaks. Move eastward into dense woodlands and you imagine longhouses reinforced against heavy snowfall. Thick bark walls and shared hearths sustain extended families through dark evenings. Snow clings to the roof, adding insulation rather than weight alone. In the southwest, winters can be cold at night but milder by day. Pueblo communities constructed multi-story dwellings from adobe and stone materials that absorb heat during sunlight hours and release it gradually after sunset. Architectural evidence indicates that such thermal mass techniques provided stability against dramatic temperature shifts. A well-established scholarly understanding highlights that indigenous winter adaptations were regionally specific, shaped by climate-available materials and cultural preference. There was no universal solution. There were many. You reflect on how outsiders have sometimes flattened this diversity into a single image of survival, yet the reality is layered and varied. An intriguing detail preserved in certain northern accounts describes how caribou fur clothing was so effective at trapping air that people sometimes had to vent excess warmth while moving even in sub-zero conditions. Too much insulation during exertion could lead to sweating, which then posed danger once activity stopped. Balance once again becomes central. Historians continue to examine how climate zones influence settlement density and winter social organization. In some areas, families gathered in larger communal structures during the coldest months. In others, smaller units remained dispersed. You feel the weight of that variation as you imagine stepping between landscapes. Each region demands attentiveness to different signs. In tundra, wind direction might matter more than tree cover. In forests, snow load on branches could pose risk to roofs. Back in your present lodge, you sense that your own winter strategy is one among many valid responses. Researchers studying indigenous architecture often emphasize that these solutions emerged from centuries of lived experience rather than abstract theory. Knowledge was refined, gradually tested by each harsh season. You step outside and look across the snow toward distant trees. Somewhere beyond this horizon, other communities are facing their own version of the same cold sky, shaped by different terrain. Some scholars still debate how quickly winter technologies and architectural ideas spread between regions, especially before widespread long-distance contact. Trade networks likely facilitated exchange, yet environmental constraints ensured local adaptation remained crucial. You return inside and sit near the fire, aware that your warmth tonight depends on choices made by those who understood this specific landscape intimately. The freezing night does not ask for uniformity, it asks for responsiveness. Across mountains, plains, forests, deserts, and tundra, Native American families developed strategies as diverse as the land itself. Snow houses in the far north, earth lodges on the plains, bark longhouses in the east, stone dwellings in the southwest. Each one stands as quiet testimony to human creativity shaped by environment. As darkness gathers again, you draw your robe close and listen to the wind brushing against the outer wall. It may sound similar across distances, yet the response to it differs. You realize that winter survival is not a single narrative. It is a constellation of solutions, each shining within its own climate. And as you settle down once more, you feel connected not only to this lodge and this river, but to a wider tapestry of winter wisdom stretching across the continent beneath the same cold stars. As winter deepens, you begin to imagine another set of eyes watching this scene. Not from within the circle of firelight, but from beyond it. Strangers arriving from distant shores carrying their own assumptions about cold and comfort. In the 17th and 18th centuries, European explorers, traders, and missionaries encountered Native American winter lifeways with a mixture of curiosity and misunderstanding. Written accounts from that period provide glimpses into these first impressions. You picture a European traveller stepping hesitantly into a snow-banked lodge, surprised by the warmth within. The air smells of smoke and hide, unfamiliar yet effective. The traveller notes the absence of brick chimneys or glass windows and assumes primitiveness. Yet the body feels warm, the frost absent, A widely accepted historical record confirms that early observers often commented on the efficiency of indigenous winter clothing and shelters even when they failed to fully grasp the underlying design principles. Some marvelled at how families could endure temperatures that Europeans found brutal. You imagine such a traveller watching as snowshoes are strapped on with practiced ease. Perhaps they attempt to step without them and sink awkwardly, much like you did earlier. Their written diary might record admiration tinged with disbelief. An intriguing detail preserved in certain colonial journals describes how some Europeans were astonished by the warmth inside snow-built shelters in northern regions. They expected freezing interiors and instead encountered relative comfort sustained by body heat and small lamps. At the same time, misunderstandings were common. Smoke-filled air might be described as unhealthy without recognizing the careful ventilation systems in place. Communal sleeping might be judged harshly by those accustomed to separate chambers. Historians continue to analyze these early accounts critically, noting both valuable observations and clear biases. Outsiders often interpreted what they saw through the lens of their own architectural and cultural norms. You sit near the hearth and consider how easily unfamiliar solutions can be misread. In some cases, European settlers gradually adopted certain indigenous winter technologies. Snowshoes, for example, were quickly recognized as indispensable for travel through deep snow. Fur garments designed for extreme cold proved superior to many early European textiles in North America. Scholarly research has shown that knowledge exchange was not one-sided. While colonists introduced new materials and tools, they also relied heavily on indigenous expertise to survive initial winters. You imagine a colonial family struggling through their first North American winter lacking adequate insulation or food storage knowledge. Without guidance from native neighbours, survival would have been uncertain. Some researchers still debate the extent to which European adaptation to winter climates depended on indigenous instruction. The documentary record suggests significant reliance, though pride and prejudice sometimes obscured acknowledgement. You glance around the lodge once more. Thick hides layered precisely. Fire balanced carefully beneath a smoke vent. Food stored beneath snow. Dogs resting near the entrance. These are not random improvisations. They are refined responses to centuries of experience. Outside, the wind shifts slightly, brushing snow against the outer wall. Inside, warmth remains steady. You reflect on how easily technological sophistication can be overlooked when it does not resemble familiar forms. A brick fireplace may look solid and permanent, yet a well-constructed tipi aligned correctly against the wind can offer comparable comfort in winter conditions. An established academic perspective emphasizes that evaluating survival strategies requires understanding context. Efficiency is measured not by resemblance to European standards, but by effectiveness within environment. You imagine the outsider stepping back into the cold night, glancing over their shoulder at smoke rising steadily into the dark. Perhaps they carry away new respect, even if their written words fail to fully convey it. As evening settles again, you feel a quiet pride in the systems surrounding you. They do not depend on imported materials or distant supply chains. They arise directly from land climate and community. The freezing night presses against many walls across the continent, including those of newly built colonial settlements. Some of those walls will fail, others will adapt. Within this lodge, warmth persists not because of novelty, but because of continuity. You lie back near the fire and close your eyes, aware that winter survival here has long been observed, sometimes misunderstood, yet consistent. Practiced, the cold remains vast beyond the walls, yet inside knowledge refined through generations continues to hold steady, indifferent to outside judgment. As the season wears on, you begin to sense how easily stories about winter can become distorted when told from a distance. The image of Native American families braving endless blizzards in flimsy shelters has often been repeated in popular imagination, yet the reality around you feels far more nuanced. You sit near the fire and reflect on how misconceptions take root. Outsiders sometimes described indigenous winter life as relentless hardship, overlooking the deliberate engineering and communal systems that made survival not only possible but sustainable. A broadly supported historical consensus makes clear that many Native American winter dwellings were specifically optimized for cold climates using materials that balanced insulation, ventilation, and mobility. These were not makeshift refuges thrown together in desperation. They were structures refined over centuries. You glance at the curved wall of the lodge, at the careful layering of hides and earth, and you recognize sophistication in what might appear simple at first glance. One persistent myth suggests that comfort was entirely absent in pre-industrial winter life. Yet comfort does not require upholstered furniture or glass windows. It requires warmth, security, nourishment, and connection. all of which you have witnessed. An intriguing anecdote preserved in some 19th century frontier accounts describes settlers expressing envy at the effectiveness of indigenous winter clothing during particularly brutal seasons. Fur-lined garments outperformed many early wool coats in extreme cold. Practicality quietly challenged prejudice. Historians continue to explore how colonial narratives sometimes exaggerated indigenous suffering to frame European expansion as benevolent or necessary. Such portrayals often ignored the adaptive expertise already present on the land. You think about the steady warmth inside this lodge. The fire does not roar uncontrollably, the smoke rises cleanly. Bedding remains dry and layered, food is rationed carefully. This is not reckless endurance, it is informed resilience. Another misconception frames communal living as primitive rather than strategic. Yet you have felt how shared body heat elevates temperature, how collective vigilance strengthens safety, how storytelling reinforces morale. Individual isolation might appear more refined in modern eyes, but in severe cold it can be disadvantageous. Some scholars still debate how early European observers shaped long-term perceptions of indigenous winter life through selective description. What was omitted often mattered as much as what was recorded. You step outside briefly and look at the snow banked carefully along the base of the lodge. To an untrained eye it might appear neglected. In truth, it is intentional insulation. The freezing night has come and gone many times already this season. Each morning you have risen warm enough to continue. You realize that hardship did exist. Winters could be unforgiving. Food shortages happened. Storms intensified. Yet hardship does not negate ingenuity. It coexists with it. A respected academic viewpoint emphasizes that indigenous technologies and social systems must be evaluated on their own terms within environmental and cultural context. Doing so reveals complexity often flattened by stereotype. Inside once more you notice a child laughing softly at something whispered near the hearth. The sound is light, unburdened. It contradicts the idea of constant misery. You reflect on how survival strategies here integrate comfort in subtle ways. Stories to soothe fear, rituals to provide meaning, animals to offer warmth, tools refined for efficiency. Even the act of banking the fire each night represents foresight rather than desperation. Historians still examine how modern media and early textbooks simplified Native American lifeways into static images, ignoring seasonal variation and adaptive innovation. As evening settles again, you feel grateful for the lived perspective you now hold. The freezing night outside remains real, the wind still howls, the snow still deepens. Yet inside you rest within a system designed thoughtfully to meet those challenges. You draw your robe closer and watch the embers glow, aware that winter survival here is neither mythic heroism nor tragic suffering alone. It is daily practice, measured, informed, shared. The cold presses outward across the land, indifferent to reputation or misunderstanding. Within these walls, warmth persists steadily built not on illusion but on knowledge. And as you close your eyes once more, you sense that part of honouring this winter wisdom lies in telling it accurately without flattening its depth or dismissing its sophistication. The night deepens, but the narrative of resilience remains clear and steady, like the quiet glow at the centre of the lodge. As the weeks pass, you begin to sense subtle changes in the cold itself. Some nights feel sharp or almost metallic in the air. Other evenings carry a faint softness, as though winter loosens its grip for a moment before tightening again. You realise that even within a single season, variation exists. Long-term climate patterns have never been perfectly stable. Tree ring studies, ice core samples and oral traditions all suggest periods when winters grew harsher or milder across different regions. While you sit near the hearth listening to the steady crackle of wood, you reflect on how communities adapted not just to average winters, but to unexpected extremes. A widely acknowledged body of research indicates that indigenous societies across North America experienced climatic fluctuations long before modern industrial change. Periods of prolonged cold or altered precipitation shaped migration, agriculture, and settlement decisions. You step outside briefly and notice how the snowpack has thickened beyond what elders described earlier in the season. The drifts press higher against the lodge walls. The sky carries a dull grey cast that hints at more to come. An elder stands nearby, scanning the horizon. There is no panic in their expression, only calculation. Oral histories in many communities recount particularly severe winters remembered by name or distinctive event. A winter when game became scarce. A winter when rivers froze earlier than expected. These memories function as cautionary tales and planning guides. A small but intriguing detail found in certain regional narratives describes how some groups shifted hunting grounds or adjusted food rations preemptively after observing unusual early snow patterns. Adaptation began before crisis fully formed. Researchers continue to examine how prolonged cold phases influence settlement structures. In some areas, evidence suggests temporary shifts toward more insulated dwellings during especially frigid decades. In others, mobility increased as resources redistributed. You return inside and sit close to the fire, feeling its warmth against your palms. The lodge remains stable. The snow banked against its base thickens insulation further, yet you sense the community recalibrating. Wood gathering becomes more urgent. Food portions are measured with even greater care. Paths between lodges are maintained diligently to prevent isolation if snowfall intensifies. Some historians debate the extent to which climatic downturns directly triggered social change versus gradual adaptation. The evidence is layered and regionally diverse. What remains clear is that flexibility mattered. You glance toward the storage pit and feel reassured by its depth. The frozen river remains solid, offering both barrier and route. Dogs rest near the entrance ears, alert. The freezing night returns once more, perhaps colder than those before. The air inside feels slightly drier. You draw your robe tighter and notice how every system adjusts quietly. Firewood is added sparingly, but consistently. The smoke flap is monitored carefully as wind direction shifts unpredictably. Snow is cleared from the roof in measured intervals to prevent excess weight. An established scholarly interpretation emphasizes that resilience emerges not from rigid tradition, but from dynamic response. Communities that observed environmental cues and adjusted practices endured more effectively. You lie back and listen to the wind's altered tone. It carries a sharper edge tonight as though winter tests boundaries. Yet within the lodge, warmth persists. Knowledge accumulated across generations provides guidance even when conditions intensify. You think about how modern heating systems shield many people from noticing subtle climatic variation. Here you feel each change directly. It demands attention, but it also cultivates awareness. Some researchers continue to explore how indigenous ecological knowledge may offer insights into contemporary climate adaptation. Observational skill honed over centuries carries enduring relevance. The embers glow brighter for a moment as a small log catches. The air shifts slightly but remains balanced. Outside, snow thickens under a darkening sky. Inside, full planning and shared vigilance respond without dramatics. You realize that surviving freezing nights was never about assuming stability. It was about expecting change. As you drift towards sleep once more, you sense that this winter, like those before it, will eventually loosen its hold. Yet the lessons learned in its harshest moments will remain stored like dried meat in a pit beneath snow, ready to guide future seasons. The cold may fluctuate, the wind may alter its path. But within this lodge, adaptability stands firm, glowing softly at the heart of winter's most testing nights. The cold has been your companion for many nights now. You no longer flinch at its first touch in the morning. Instead, you recognize its tone, its weight, its subtle moods. And as you sit beside the steady fire, you begin to see something even more enduring than shelter or stored food. You see continuity. A child near the hearth carefully imitates the way an adult folds a robe for the night. The gesture is small, almost unremarkable. Yet within it lives a pattern repeated countless times before. A broadly supported historical understanding affirms that survival knowledge among Native American communities was transmitted through lived example far more than through written instruction. Techniques for insulating a lodge positioning bedding, storing meat beneath snow or adjusting a smoke flap were not learned in a single lesson. They were absorbed over years of observation. You watch as a young person listens closely, while an elder describes how to read snowdrift shapes for clues about wind. The lesson does not feel formal. It flows naturally woven into the rhythm of the day. There is an idea often emphasized by scholars of traditional ecological knowledge that resilience is cumulative. Each generation inherits strategies tested by those before them, then refines them further. You step outside briefly and notice how the snowbank against the lodge has been shaped carefully, curved just enough to deflect the strongest gusts. A younger pair of hands has helped with that shaping. The work becomes practice. A small but evocative detail recorded in certain community narratives describes how children were encouraged to build miniature shelters in snow as play mimicking adult architecture. Through imitation, they learned structural balance long before they bore full responsibility. Historians continue to explore how such experiential learning fostered adaptability across centuries of environmental change. When survival knowledge lives in daily habit, it endures beyond individual lifetimes. Inside, once more, you sit near the fire and listen to the quiet murmur of conversation. Someone recounts how their grandparent once adjusted camp location during an especially windy winter. The memory becomes instruction. You realize that nothing here stands alone. The fire burning tonight draws on wood gathered earlier. The wood gathering draws on tools crafted previously. The tools depend on knowledge of materials, each layer rests upon another. A respected academic perspective underscores that cultural continuity often functions as a stabilizing force during environmental stress. The familiarity of practiced routines tempers uncertainty. The freezing night outside remains immense stars sharp above snow-covered ground, yet inside repetition offers reassurance. You notice how even the youngest members of the lodge instinctively pull their coverings close when wind rattles the walls. They have internalized the response. Some researchers debate how rapidly winter survival strategies evolved when new materials or external pressures emerged. Evidence suggests both persistence and innovation coexisted. Traditions held firm yet adapted when needed. You lean back against the curved wall and feel its solid presence. Generations before you sat in similar warmth, hearing similar winds. The dogs stir briefly, then settle. The embers pulse gently. You sense that the greatest strength here lies not only in physical insulation, but in shared memory carried forward. When this winter ends and another arrives years from now, the same principles will guide preparation. Perhaps refined, perhaps adjusted, but rooted in accumulated experience. You draw your robe closer and glance toward a child already asleep, face relaxed in firelight. One day they will tell stories of this winter to others. The cold outside does not know their names. It does not care. Yet within these walls, knowledge persists beyond individual seasons. Surviving freezing nights without modern homes depends not merely on immediate ingenuity, but on the quiet chain of learning, stretching backward and forward through time. As you settle more deeply into warmth, you recognize that winter tests bodies, but it also reveals the strength of continuity. The wind sighs beyond the walls, the fire answers with a soft crackle, and within that exchange you feel part of something steady and enduring, carried gently from one generation to the next beneath the same cold sky. The winter has stretched long, yet tonight feels different. Not warmer exactly, but quieter in a way that suggests turning. You lie near the fire and sense that the cold outside, though still firm, has softened at its edges. Your breath no longer rises in such sharp clouds inside the lodge. The embers glow low and steady, no longer fighting quite so hard against the air. You think back to that first night when you stood beneath a vast sky, unsure how anyone could endure such freezing darkness without brick walls or glass windows. You remember the weight of the wind on your shoulders, the doubt that crept in. Now you rest inside a space shaped by hide, earth, snow and memory. The walls feel less like barriers and more like companions. A well-established historical understanding reminds us that winter was not a single dramatic event for Native American families. It was a season woven into yearly rhythm. It arrived, it lingered, it passed, and each year preparation began again. You glance toward the smoke hole and notice how the air drifting upward feels gentler. Outside snow remains thick across the ground, yet somewhere beneath it water will begin its slow movement again when the time is right. Some scholars have reflected on how winter shaped cultural identity itself. Enduring long, cold months fostered patience, foresight and communal reliance. The freezing night was not simply survived, it became teacher and a measure. You shift slightly and feel the comforting weight of your robe, the familiar layering that once felt foreign. You no longer question its design, you trust it. Across the lodge someone turns in sleep. A dog lifts its head briefly, then settles again. There is a small but touching detail preserved in certain community traditions, that at the end of winter families would sometimes acknowledge the season's departure with quiet gratitude. Not because it was easy, but because it had strengthened them. Historians continue to explore how cyclical hardship can reinforce social bonds rather than fracture them. Shared challenge often deepens connection. You think of the elders whose stories carried memory of harsher winters, of the children who learned to read wind and snow as naturally as breath, of the hunters who followed herds across frozen plains, of the careful hands that stitched fur lining and adjusted smoke flaps. The freezing nights did not vanish because they were conquered, they receded because seasons turn. You listen closely now. The wind outside has softened to a faint murmur. The snow along the walls holds steady, no longer driven hard against the lodge. The fire flickers once, then settles into a low amber glow. You allow your thoughts to slow like water beneath ice preparing to move again. The cold taught you about layering, about shared warmth, about listening in darkness. It revealed how shelter can be built from what the land offers. It showed you that survival rests not in modern materials alone, but in attention, cooperation and memory. Your breathing grows deeper, slower. Outside the night remains vast and pale beneath starlight, yet it no longer feels endless. Within these walls, warmth lingers gently, no longer urgent but steady. You feel gratitude for the quiet ingenuity that shaped this space, for the snowbank deliberately, for the hides layered with care, for the fire tended without excess, for the stories that carried meaning through long hours of darkness. The freezing nights have left their imprint, yet they have also left knowledge. You draw your robe closer and let the steady rhythm of breath and ember guide you downward into rest. The lodge holds you. The earth beneath holds the lodge. The snow holds the earth in stillness. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the promise of thaw waits patiently, just as winter once waited. You exhale softly, feeling the final tension melt away. The fire dims to a faint glow like the last star before dawn. Let your thoughts drift, now as gently as smoke rising into the quiet sky. The cold has done its work, the warmth has answered, and you, wrapped in layers of knowledge and care, can finally rest. Now as the story softens and the embers settle into their quiet red hush, let everything slow a little more. The wind outside is no longer a howl, but a distant sigh moving across snow that will soon begin almost imperceptibly to change. The lodge rests easily upon the earth, its walls holding the last gentle traces of heat from the day's fire. You feel the steady rhythm of breath around you, human and animal alike, rising and falling in calm unison. No urgency remains, no sharp edges of cold press against your thoughts. The season that once seemed immense and unyielding now feels like a chapter that has unfolded exactly as it should. The snow beyond these walls glows faintly beneath starlight. Beneath that snow seeds wait. Water waits. Life waits. Just as families have waited through countless winters before trusting in cycles older than memory. Your body grows heavier, wrapped in warmth, layered carefully by attentive hands and inherited wisdom. The fire settles into a soft pulse, no longer crackling, simply breathing. Let your mind drift across the quiet plains, over frozen rivers, through forests dusted in white. Every lodge, every snow shelter, every earth home rests in the same hush. The cold sky stretches wide, but it no longer feels threatening. It feels vast and still. You are safe inside this steady circle of warmth and memory. The embers dim, the wind softens, and the long winter night finally carries you gently into sleep. Sweet dreams.